Welcome to NightSleepWhisper. Leave the world behind for a moment. Tonight, you are invited to more than just a story. You are stepping into a massive, 50-chapter epic. Together with Captain Silas and his crew, we will travel from misty seas to ancient temples, and from stormy harbors to the very stars in the sky. Now, lean back, close your eyes. Our sails are set. The mystery of the Golden Compass is about to begin. If you are ready. The stone walls were cold and wet. Captain Silas sat on the hard floor of his cell. The room was very small and very dark. Only a tiny window high above let in a little bit of light. Silas looked up at the window. He could see a small piece of the blue sky. He could also smell the salt in the air. He knew the ocean was very near. The harbor of Port Royal was just outside the heavy stone walls. Silas was a tall man with long, dark hair. His face was brown from the sun. His hands were rough and strong from many years of pulling ropes and holding a ship's wheel. He had a small, thin scar on his left cheek from an old fight in a faraway land. Now, those hands were empty. He wore old, dirty clothes that smelled like dust. The king's soldiers took his grand hat and his sharp sword 3 weeks ago. They took his freedom, too. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the sea. In his mind, he saw his old ship, the Sea Ghost. He felt the warm sun on his back. He imagined the wind moving through the large, white sails. The sound of the water hitting the wood of the ship was like a beautiful song to him. On the ocean, Silas was a king. He was free to go anywhere. Here, in this prison, he was just a man in a cage. A loud noise came from the hallway. It was the sound of heavy boots hitting the stone floor. A guard walked past the iron bars of the cell. The guard carried a metal lamp and a bunch of keys. The yellow light was very bright. It hurt Silas's eyes because he had been in the dark for a long time. "Are you still awake, Captain?" the guard asked. He had a mean laugh. He liked to see the famous pirate in a cell. Silas did not move. He did not look at the guard. A captain never sleeps when the tide is turning. Silas answered. His voice was deep and very dry. He needed water, but he did not ask for it. The guard laughed again. The metal keys made a sharp, ringing noise as they hit each other. "There is no tide for you here, Vane. You will stay in this dark room until the king decides your end. The king does not like pirates, and he hates you most of all." The guard walked away. The yellow light went with him. Silas was alone in the dark again. He touched the cold stone wall. He felt the damp moss growing in the corners. He knew he could not stay here. He was a man of the sea. This prison felt like a small cage for a large bird. He thought about his secret. The soldiers were not smart. They did not find his map. It was hidden inside the leather of his boot. That map was the key to a great treasure. It was the reason he came to Port Royal. But the map was no good if he stayed in this cell. He needed to get out. He needed a plan. Silas looked back at the tiny window. The sky was turning from blue to gray. Night was coming. He leaned his head against the wall and listened to the distant, rhythmic sound of the waves. The next morning, the sun was very bright. A thin line of golden light moved across the floor of the cell. Silas woke up when he heard the heavy iron door at the end of the hallway. The sound of metal scraping against metal was very loud in the quiet prison. 2 guards walked toward the cells. They were not alone. They were pulling a woman by her arms. The woman was tall and had very strong shoulders. Her hair was short and dark, and her clothes were torn and dusty. She did not walk like a prisoner. She walked with her head held high, even though her hands were tied with thick rope. The guards stopped at the cell right next to Silas. They pushed the woman inside. She hit the stone floor, but she did not cry out. She stood up slowly and brushed the dirt from her trousers. Stay there and be quiet. Ilara. One guard said. He looked at her with angry eyes. You caused a lot of trouble at the docks. You hurt 3 of our men. The woman, Ilara, looked at the guard. She did not look afraid. A small, confident smile grew on her face. Your men are slow and weak, she said. Her voice was steady and calm. They should practice more with their swords. The guards grumbled and walked away. The heavy door closed, and the hallway became quiet again. Silas stood up and moved closer to the iron bars that separated his cell from hers. He watched her for a moment. She was looking at the small window in her own cell. She was checking the strength of the bars. You fight well for someone in chains, Silas said quietly. Ilara turned around quickly. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She looked at Silas from his boots to his face. She saw his rough hands and the scar on his cheek. And you look like a man who knows the sea, she replied. She sat down on the floor and began to pick at the knots in the rope on her wrists. My name is Ilara. I was a navigator on a merchant ship before the king's men took it. I am Silas Vane, he said. Ilara's eyes went wide. The pirate captain. People say you are the best sailor in the Caribbean. They also say you have a map to a place that does not exist. Silas smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in weeks. People say many things. Some are true, and some are just stories. He watched her work on the ropes. Her fingers were fast and very skilled. Why are you here, Ilara? I was looking for a ship, she explained. The Navy took my old captain's boat because he did not pay his taxes. I tried to take it back. I almost won, but there were too many soldiers. She finally pulled the rope loose. She rubbed her red wrists and looked at Silas. I want to go back to the ocean. I do not like stone walls. Silas nodded. He felt a connection to this woman. She had the spirit of a sailor. She had fire in her eyes. I am going to leave this place, Ilara. I have a plan, and I have a map, but I cannot sail a ship alone. I need a crew. I need someone who can fight and someone who knows the stars. Ilara stood up and walked to the bars. She looked Silas in the eye. I know the stars better than any man in Port Royal, she said. And I can fight better than your best pirate. If you get me out of this cage, I will help you find your treasure. Silas reached out his hand through the bars. Ilara took it. Her grip was as strong as iron. In that dark prison, a new partnership was born. They were no longer just prisoners. They were a captain and a first mate. Silas and Ilara spent the afternoon talking in whispers. The prison was very quiet, except for the sound of water dripping from the ceiling. Silas knew the guards well. He knew their names and their habits. He knew one guard in particular was very greedy. His name was Miller. Miller wants gold more than he wants his job. Silas said to Ilara through the bars. He is a lazy man. He thinks he is smart, but he is only selfish. Ilara agreed. I saw him taking bread from a hungry prisoner earlier today, she said. He does not care about the rules. He only cares about himself. Silas reached into his boot. He did not pull out his secret map. Instead, he pulled out a small, shiny button from his old pirate coat. It was made of bright brass. In the dark prison, it looked like a real gold coin. He held it up so Ilara could see it. We will use this, Silas whispered. When Miller comes with the evening meal, you must call him. Tell him you found something valuable in the corner of your cell. He will be curious. He will want to see it. Ilara nodded. She understood the plan perfectly. I will tell him it is a ring from a wealthy traveler. I will say it was hidden under a loose stone in the floor. He will not be able to resist. The hours passed slowly. The sun went down, and the prison became very cold. Silas and Ilara waited in silence. Finally, the sound of heavy boots returned to the hallway. Miller was walking toward their cells. He carried 2 wooden bowls of thin, grey soup. He looked tired and angry. He stopped at Ilara's cell first. He pushed a bowl through the small hole at the bottom of the door. "Eat quickly." Miller growled. "I want to finish my work and go home." Ilara did not touch the bowl. She stayed in the dark corner of her cell. She made her voice sound very excited and nervous. "Guard! Come here. Look at what I found under the floor." Miller stopped. He turned his oil lamp toward her. The bright light filled the cell. "What are you talking about?" "Stop wasting my time, prisoner." Ilara held her closed hand near the iron bars. She opened her fingers just a little bit. The yellow light of the lamp hit the brass button. It sparkled beautifully. Miller's eyes went wide. He stepped closer to the bars. He forgot about the soup. "Is that gold?" Miller whispered. His voice was greedy. "Give it to me right now." "I cannot," Ilara said. "It is stuck between the heavy stones. I can only see a part of it. If you open the door and help me, we can share the treasure. There might be more coins under the dirt." The guard looked around the hallway. It was empty. He was alone with the prisoners. His greed was much stronger than his duty. He took the heavy ring of keys from his leather belt. He put a large key into the lock of Ilara's door. The metal made a grinding sound as it turned. The heavy door opened with a slow groan. "Show me the spot," Miller said. He stepped into the cell and leaned down to look at the floor. This was the moment Silas was waiting for. He reached his long, strong arms through the bars of his own cell. He grabbed the guard's collar and pulled him back against the bars. Miller tried to shout, but Ilara was fast. She jumped forward and put her hand over his mouth. The escape had begun. Silas held the guard firmly against the bars. Miller tried to move, but Silas was too strong. Ilara took the heavy ring of keys from the guard's belt. She quickly found the key for Silas's cell. She put it into the lock and turned it. The metal made a loud, grinding noise in the quiet hallway. The door swung open, and Silas stepped out into the hall. He was finally free from his small, dark cage. "Help me with him," Ilara whispered. They pulled the guard into the empty cell. Silas used the guard's own cloth belt to tie his hands. Ilara took a piece of fabric and put it in the guard's mouth so he could not scream for help. They closed the iron door and locked it. Miller looked at them with wide, angry eyes. But he could not do anything. Silas took the guard's lamp and blew out the flame. Now, the hallway was completely dark. "Follow me," Silas said. "I know the way to the back door. The soldiers usually sleep near the main entrance." They moved like shadows through the long, stone hallways. Their boots made very soft sounds on the floor. Silas led Ilara past the kitchen and the storage rooms. They reached a small wooden door at the end of a narrow path. Silas pushed it slowly. The door made a long, low creak, but no one heard it. They stepped outside and felt the cool night air on their faces. It smelled of salt and wet wood. Port Royal was quiet, but it was not empty. Silas and Ilara stayed close to the walls of the tall buildings. The streets were made of hard grey stones. In the distance, they saw the yellow glow of lanterns. A group of 4 soldiers walked past the end of the street. Silas and Ilara stopped and hid behind a large wooden barrel. They waited until the sound of the soldiers' heavy footsteps faded away. "The docks are that way," Ilara whispered, pointing toward the water. I can see the masts of the tall ships against the moon." They ran quickly through the narrow alleys. Silas felt his heart beating fast in his chest. It was a good feeling. He was no longer a prisoner. He was a man on a mission. The air became thicker with the smell of the ocean. They turned a final corner and saw the harbor. Many ships sat in the dark water. Some were small fishing boats, and others were large ships with many cannons. The moon was bright, and it made the water look like silver. Silas looked for a specific ship. He needed a vessel that was fast and strong. "There," Silas said, pointing to a beautiful ship with a very sleek hull. "That is the Royal Swift. It is the fastest ship in the King's Navy. If we take that ship, no one can catch us." Ilara looked at the ship and nodded. "It is a fine ship, Captain. But there are guards on the deck. We must be very careful." Silas looked at the water and then at his new friend. "We did not come this far to turn back now," he said. "The sea is calling us." The harbor was very quiet. Silas and Ilara stood behind a stack of wooden crates near the water's edge. The Royal Swift sat about 50 meters away from the dock. 2 soldiers stood at the entrance of the pier. They had long muskets and sharp bayonets. Silas knew they could not walk past the soldiers. "The water is the only way," Silas whispered. Ilara nodded. She took off her heavy boots and tied them to her belt. Silas did the same. They slipped into the dark, cold water. The water felt like ice against their skin. Silas swam slowly. He did not want to make any big waves. He only heard the soft sound of his own breathing and the distant call of a night bird. They reached the side of the ship. The Royal Swift was a beautiful vessel. Its hull was painted black and gold. Silas found a thick rope hanging from the side. He grabbed it and began to climb. His arms felt heavy, but the thought of freedom gave him strength. He reached the top and looked over the wooden rail. One guard sat near the front of the ship. He was looking at the moon and humming a low tune. Another guard stood near the steering wheel at the back. Silas signaled to Ilara. She climbed up quickly and landed on the deck with a soft sound of her bare feet hitting the wood. Silas moved toward the guard at the wheel. The man turned around at the last second. He tried to reach for his sword, but Silas was too fast. Silas hit the man hard. The guard fell to the wooden floor and did not move. At the same time, Ilara ran toward the guard at the front. She grabbed his musket and threw it into the sea. The sound of the heavy metal hitting the water was the only noise in the night. She then pushed the guard over the side. He fell into the harbor with a large wave of water following him. "The keys," Silas said. He found the keys to the ship's locks on the first guard's belt. "I will handle the sails," Ilara said. She ran to the mast. She worked fast. She untied the ropes that held the large white sheets of fabric. The sails fell down and caught the midnight wind. The fabric made a snapping sound as it filled with air. Silas stood at the wheel. He felt the power of the ship under his feet. He used a sharp knife to cut the final ropes that held the ship to the dock. The Royal Swift began to move. It glided through the water like a ghost. "We are doing it," Ilara said. She looked back at the prison on the hill. The soldiers on the pier finally saw the ship moving. They began to shout. A loud bell started to ring in the town. The sound of the bell traveled across the water, waking up the sleeping port. But it was too late. The Royal Swift was already moving into the deep, dark ocean. Silas turned the wheel, and the ship headed toward the open sea. Freedom was finally theirs. The sun began to rise over the edge of the world. The sky turned from a deep purple to a bright, burning orange. Silas stood at the wooden wheel of the Royal Swift. He felt the vibration of the ship as it cut through the blue water. The wind was strong and steady. It pushed the ship away from the land and toward the wide, open horizon. Silas took a deep breath. The air here was different. It did not smell like the dusty prison or the dirty streets of the port. It smelled fresh and clean. He looked down at his hands. They were steady on the wheel. For the first time in many weeks, Silas felt like himself again. He was not a prisoner. He was a captain. Ilara walked across the deck. She moved with ease, even as the ship leaned to one side in the wind. She had found a clean shirt and a pair of sturdy boots in the crew's quarters. She looked like a true sailor now. She stopped next to Silas and looked out at the water. Port Royal was now just a thin, grey line far behind them. "The wind is good, Captain," Ilara said. She shielded her eyes from the bright morning sun. "The Royal Swift is as fast as they say. No Navy ship can follow us at this speed." Silas nodded. "She is a fine vessel. She moves like a bird on the water." He looked up at the tall masts and the white sails. The fabric was tight and full of wind. The wood of the ship made low, groaning sounds as it met the waves. It was the sound of a healthy ship. "Where are we going?" Ilara asked. "We have the ship, but we do not have a crew. 2 people cannot sail this ship for long. We will get tired, and the sea is dangerous." Silas reached into his boot. He pulled out the piece of old leather. He opened it carefully. Inside was the secret map. It was covered in strange lines and small drawings of islands. In the center of the map, there was a drawing of a golden compass. "We are going to Tortuga," Silas answered. "It is a city for people like us. We can find a crew there. We can find food and water. And most importantly, we can prepare for the journey to the Lost Sea." Ilara looked at the map. Her eyes moved across the drawings. She was a navigator, and she understood the patterns of the ocean. "The Lost Sea is a place of many myths," she whispered. "Many sailors go there and never come back. Are you sure the treasure is real?" Silas looked at the horizon. He saw a group of white birds flying high in the sky. "I am sure," he said. "The golden compass is there. It is not just a story. My father saw it once, many years ago. It has the power to lead a man to his greatest dreams." He turned the wheel slightly to the right. The ship responded immediately. They were heading south. Silas felt a sense of purpose. He had a ship, a partner, and a map. The adventure was only beginning. The sun was high in the sky now. The heat was strong, but the ocean breeze kept the lead deck cool. Silas called Ilara to the captain's cabin. The room was large and made of dark, polished wood. There was a big desk in the center and many shelves for books and charts. This room belonged to a Navy officer before, but now it was Silas's office. Silas sat at the desk. He took the old piece of leather from his boot again. He also found a small, hidden pocket inside his heavy leather belt. From that pocket, he pulled out a thin piece of yellow paper. It was very old and felt like dry leaves in his hands. He placed it carefully on the desk next to the leather map. "Come closer, Ilara," Silas said. Ilara walked to the desk. She looked at the paper with great interest. She was a navigator, so she loved maps and charts. The paper was covered in tiny, neat writing. There were also drawings of stars and moon phases. In the middle of the paper, there was a drawing of a compass with a needle made of bright yellow ink. "This is not a normal map," Ilara whispered. She touched the edge of the paper. "These are not just islands. These are coordinates for the stars." "You are right," Silas said. He pointed to a group of stars on the paper. "This map shows the path to the golden compass. But you cannot find the path during the day. You must look at the stars at a specific time of the year. The compass is hidden on an island that moves with the tides. Ilara looked confused. An island that moves? That is impossible. Islands are made of rock. They stay in one place. Silas shook his head. The legend of the Golden Compass says the island is part of a great mystery. My father told me about it when I was a young man. He said the island is hidden by a permanent fog. The only way to see through the fog is to use the stars as a guide. But you need more than just the stars. You need the second half of this map. There is more. Ilara asked. She looked at the small piece of paper. Where is the rest of it? I do not have it. Silas admitted. His voice was low. The second piece was stolen many years ago. It belongs to a man named Barnaby. He was my father's best friend. But they had a fight. Now, Barnaby lives in Tortuga. He is old and retired, but I think he still has the paper. Ilara crossed her arms. She looked at the map and then at Silas. So, we are going to Tortuga to find a man who might hate you. That sounds dangerous. Everything about the sea is dangerous. Silas replied. He looked out the cabin window at the blue water. But the Golden Compass is worth the risk. It is said that the compass can show a captain the way to any treasure in the world. With it, we will never be poor again. We will be the most powerful sailors on the ocean. Ilara looked at the drawing of the golden needle. She could see the fire of adventure in Silas's eyes. She felt the same fire in her own heart. She was a navigator without a ship, and Silas was a captain without a crew. Together, they had a chance to do something great. Then we must find this Barnaby. Ilara said firmly. And we must find him before the king's navy finds us. The Royal Swift sailed slowly into the harbor of Tortuga. The island was very beautiful but very busy. The city was built on a green hill that looked over the blue water. There were hundreds of ships in the bay. Some were small fishing boats, but others were giant vessels with many cannons. The air was thick with the smell of grilled fish, old wood, and salty sea spray. Silas steered the ship to a quiet part of the docks. He did not want to attract too much attention from the local pirate lords. Welcome to the city of thieves, Silas said to Ilara. They stepped off the ship and onto the wooden pier. The wood was old and felt soft under their boots. They walked through the busy streets. Men and women with dark skin and faces lined by the sun moved around them. People carried large boxes of fruit and heavy barrels of rum. There were no king's soldiers here. There were no laws from the mainland. It was a place where every person carried a sword or a sharp knife. It was a place for people who loved freedom. We need a crew, Silas said as they walked. But we need people we can trust. Many pirates here are lazy, and some are very dangerous. We need the best. Ilara looked at a group of sailors sitting near a large fire. We need people who know how to work hard. She added. We need a cook, a carpenter, and people who know how to fire the cannons. A ship is only as good as the people on it. They arrived at a large building called the Rusty Anchor. It was a famous tavern for sailors and explorers. Inside, the air was hot and crowded. The light came from many candles stuck to the stone walls. The sound of many voices talking and laughing at once was like a loud, constant hum. Silas walked to the center of the room. He stood on a heavy wooden chair so everyone could see him. Listen to me, Silas shouted. His voice was strong and clear. The room became quiet. Many people turned their heads to look at the tall man. I am Captain Silas Vane, he said. A few people whispered his name to their friends. They knew he was a famous pirate who recently escaped from prison. I have a new ship. It is the fastest ship in the Caribbean. I am going to find a great treasure. I need a crew of brave men and women. If you work hard and stay loyal, you will be rich for the rest of your lives." A large man with a thick, grey beard stood up. He had a heavy hammer hanging from his leather belt. "I am a carpenter," the man said. "I can fix any hole in a ship, even in a storm. But why should I follow you? Vain. The Navy is looking for you." Silas looked the man in the eye. "Because I have a map to the Golden Compass, and because I am the only captain who is brave enough to sail into the lost sea." The people in the tavern began to talk again. Some looked excited, and others looked afraid. Silas and Ilara waited. They needed to see who had the courage to step forward. The silence in the tavern did not last long. A man sitting in the corner stood up slowly. He was very wide and had a red face. He wore a heavy leather vest and carried a long, curved sword at his side. This was Garrick, a pirate who was known for his mean temper and his great strength. He walked toward the center of the room, and the other pirates moved out of his way. "You talk about treasure and fast ships, vain," Garrick said. His voice was like the sound of grinding stones. "But I think you are just a man with a piece of old leather and a lot of lies. You lost your ship to the king. You lost your freedom. Why should anyone follow a loser?" Silas did not move. He stayed on the chair and looked down at Garrick. "I am standing here now, am I not? The king's walls could not hold me. The king's fastest ship is now my ship. If you think I am weak, Garrick, you are welcome to try your luck." Garrick laughed, and the sound was deep and unpleasant. He reached out and grabbed the leg of Silas's chair. With a sudden pull, he tipped the chair over. Silas was fast. He jumped into the air and landed lightly on his feet. He did not pull his sword yet. He wanted to show the people in the tavern that he was a leader because of his skill, not just his weapon. Garrick swung a heavy fist at Silas's head. Silas moved his head to the left, and the fist hit the air. The big man was strong, but he was slow. Silas hit Garrick in the stomach with 2 fast punches. Garrick gasped for air and stepped back. He was angry now. He pulled his sword from its sheath. "Now you will die, Captain," Garrick growled. Ilara moved forward to help, but Silas held up his hand. "Stay back, Ilara," he said firmly. "This is my fight." Garrick moved forward and swung his sword in a wide circle. Silas pulled a small, heavy knife from his belt. He did not have a long sword, but he was very quick. The heavy sword hit a wooden table next to Silas. Silas stepped inside Garrick's reach. He used the handle of his knife to hit Garrick's wrist. The big man cried out in pain, and his sword fell to the floor. Silas put his knife to Garrick's throat. The tavern was completely silent. Everyone watched the 2 men. Silas looked into Garrick's eyes. He did not look angry. He looked calm. "I do not want to kill you, Garrick," Silas said quietly. "I want to sail the ocean. I want a crew that is brave. You are strong, but you are not a leader. Pick up your sword and sit down." Silas pulled the knife away. Garrick looked at the floor. He was embarrassed. He picked up his sword and walked back to his corner without saying another word. The people in the tavern began to cheer. The carpenter with the grey beard walked up to Silas. He put a large hand on Silas's shoulder. "My name is Bram," he said. "You have courage, Vane. I will fix your ship. I will follow you to the lost sea." 5 other men and 3 women stood up as well. They all wanted to join the crew of the Royal Swift. Silas looked at Ilara and smiled. They finally had their crew. The docks of Tortuga were busy the next morning. Silas stood on the deck of the Royal Swift and watched his new crew. Bram, the tall carpenter, was already at work. He used his heavy tools to check the wood of the masts. 5 other men and 3 women carried heavy bags of food and barrels of fresh water onto the ship. They worked quickly and did not complain. Ilara stood near the entrance of the ship. She had a long list of supplies in her hand. She checked every box that came on board. "We have enough dried meat for a month," she told Silas. "And we have plenty of fruit to keep the crew healthy. The cannons are clean, and we have enough black powder for a fight." Silas nodded. He felt a sense of pride. Only a few days ago, he was alone in a dark cell. Now, he had a fast ship and a team of 10 brave people. He walked to the middle of the deck and looked at a large piece of black fabric. One of the new crew members, a woman named Mara, was sewing a design onto the cloth with white thread. It was a picture of a golden compass over 2 crossed swords. "Is the flag ready?" Silas asked. Mara finished the last stitch and held it up. The wind caught the black cloth. "It is ready, Captain. It is the flag of the Royal Swift." Silas took the flag and walked to the back of the ship. He tied the ropes and pulled the fabric high into the air. The black flag moved beautifully in the blue sky. It was a signal to everyone in Tortuga. Silas Vane was back, and he was a pirate once again. The crew saw the flag and cheered. Their voices were loud and full of excitement. "Lower the ropes," Silas commanded. His voice was loud and carried across the water. "Raise the anchor." The crew ran to their positions. Some pulled on the thick, rough ropes to open the sails. Others turned the heavy metal wheel to lift the anchor from the sandy floor of the harbor. Silas took his place at the steering wheel. He felt the ship begin to move. The Royal Swift glided away from the wooden pier. As they left the harbor, Silas looked back at Tortuga. The green hills and the busy city became smaller and smaller. The other pirate ships in the bay looked like tiny toys. Ahead of them, there was only the deep blue ocean and the white clouds. They did not have a perfect map yet, and they did not know what dangers waited for them. But they had a goal. "Set the course for the open sea, Ilara," Silas said. Ilara looked at the sun and then at her compass. "Heading southwest, Captain. The wind is with us." The ship moved faster as it hit the larger waves of the deep water. The journey to find the golden compass had truly begun. Silas looked at the horizon with a smile. The unknown was waiting, and he was ready to meet it. The weather changed very quickly. In the morning, the sun was bright and the air was warm. By the afternoon, the sky was a deep, dark gray. The warm breeze became a cold, sharp wind. Silas stood on the deck and looked at the clouds. They were thick and heavy. He knew this was not a normal rain. This was a great storm of the Caribbean. "Everyone on deck," Silas shouted. His voice was loud, even against the rising wind. "Bram, check the lower deck for leaks. Mara, help the others with the main sail. We must make the ship light." The crew ran to their stations. They were no longer the group of strangers from the tavern. They were now a team. They worked together to pull the heavy white fabric of the sails. The wind was very strong now. It made the sails shake and jump. The ropes felt like they might break. The sailors pulled with all their strength, their muscles hard and their faces red from the effort. Ilara moved across the deck to help Silas. She had to hold onto the wooden rail to stay standing. The ship was rocking from side to side. "The waves are getting higher, Silas," she yelled. "The compass is spinning. The metal is confused by the storm." Silas held the wooden steering wheel with both hands. He planted his feet wide on the deck. He felt the power of the ocean through the wood. A massive wave, as tall as a house, came toward the front of the ship. The Royal Swift rose up, and up. For a moment, it felt like the ship was flying in the dark air. Then, it dropped down into the deep valley of the waves. The sound of the water hitting the wooden hull was like a giant hammer hitting a drum. It was a deep, heavy noise that shook the bones of every person on board. Silas was wet from the rain and the sea spray. His hair was stuck to his face, and his eyes burned from the salt. But he did not let go of the wheel. He turned it slowly to meet the next wave at the right angle. "I will not let this sea take us," Silas promised. Bram came up from below the deck. His face was covered in salt and water. "The hull is strong, Captain. We are taking in a little water, but we can fix it. The wood is holding together." Mara and 2 other sailors tied the last of the ropes. They were exhausted, but they did not stop. They all looked at their captain. Silas was like a rock in the middle of the chaos. He gave them hope. The storm continued for many hours. The sky was black, and the only light came from the flashes of light in the clouds. Each flash showed the giant, white-topped waves all around them. It was a terrifying sight. But the crew of the Royal Swift did not give up. They fought for their ship, and they fought for each other. The sun rose on a very quiet ocean. The giant waves were gone, and the wind was now just a soft breeze. But the Royal Swift was in bad shape. Silas walked across the deck and looked up. The main mast, the tallest wooden pole on the ship, was not straight. There was a large, deep crack in the middle of the wood. The heavy sails hung limply, and several ropes were torn and useless. Bram was already at the base of the mast. He touched the wood with his large, rough hands. His face was very serious. He looked at the crack and then looked at Silas. "It is bad, Captain," Bram said. His voice was tired. The storm was too strong. "This wood is old, and the wind nearly snapped it like a dry twig. We cannot raise the sails again. If we do, the whole mast will fall and crush the deck." Silas looked at the damage. Without the main mast, the ship was slow. They were like a bird with a broken wing. In the middle of the ocean, a slow ship was a dead ship. If Admiral Thorne and the Navy found them now, they could not run away. "Can you fix it here, Bram?" Silas asked. The carpenter shook his head. "I can tie it with ropes for a short time, but it will not hold in another wind. We need a new piece of timber. We need a very tall, strong tree. We need to find land." Ilara came over with a paper chart in her hands. She had a pencil behind her ear. She looked at the horizon and then at her map. "We are lucky, Silas. There is a small island about 10 miles to the east. It is called Green Rock. Sailors say it has many tall trees and a beach where the water is calm." Silas looked toward the east. He could see nothing but blue water, but he trusted Ilara. She was the best navigator he knew. "Change the course." Silas commanded the crew. "Use the small sails only. We must move slowly and carefully." The crew moved with purpose, but they were very quiet. They were all exhausted from the long night. They spent the next few hours cleaning the deck and throwing the salt water back into the ocean with wooden buckets. They ate some dry bread and cold meat, but no one spoke much. Their eyes were fixed on the horizon. After 4 hours, Mara shouted from the front of the ship, "Land! I see land." A small green dot appeared on the blue line of the sea. As they got closer, the dot grew into a beautiful island. It had high cliffs and a very thick forest of dark green trees. The trees were very tall and straight. "Those are the trees we need," Bram said, a small smile appearing in his beard. "That is good, hard wood." Silas steered the ship toward a quiet bay. The water was clear and green near the shore. He dropped the anchor. They were safer now, but the hard work was just beginning. They had to go into the forest and find a way to fix their ship. The Royal Swift sat quietly in the calm water of the bay. Silas looked at the island of Green Rock. It was very beautiful. The sand on the beach was white and soft. Beyond the sand, the forest was a wall of dark green. The The trees were so thick that he could not see very far into the island. The only sound was the gentle movement of the water against the ship's hull. "Lower the small boat," Silas ordered. Bram, Ilara, and two other sailors named Thomas and Sarah climbed into the wooden boat. Silas joined them. They carried heavy axes, long ropes, and a large saw. They moved the oars together, and the boat glided toward the shore. When the boat hit the sand, Silas jumped out. The water was warm and clear. "This place is very quiet," Ilara whispered. She looked at the trees. She held her small knife in her hand. "Just in case. I do not see any houses or smoke. I think we are alone." "That is good," Silas said. "We do not want any trouble. We only want wood." They walked across the white sand and entered the forest. The air inside was very different. It was cool and smelled like damp earth and flowers. Large ferns grew on the ground, and colorful birds flew high above the branches. The sun only came through the leaves in small, bright spots. Bram walked slowly. He stopped at many trees and hit the bark with the back of his axe. He was listening to the sound. He wanted a tree that was strong and healthy. If the wood was soft or rotten, the mast would break again. "Not this one," Bram said, moving past a thick oak. "And not that one. The wood is too curved." They walked deeper into the forest. The ground became a bit steep. Finally, Bram stopped in front of a very tall, straight tree. It was a silver pine. Its trunk was perfect. It was wider than a man's body and reached high into the blue sky. "This is the one," Bram said. He looked up at the branches. "This tree is strong enough to carry us across the world. It will make a fine mast for the Royal Swift." Silas looked at the tree. It was magnificent. He felt a little sad to cut it down, but he knew they had no choice. "Start the work," he said. Thomas and Sarah took their axes. They began to hit the base of the tree. The sound of the metal hitting the wood was loud and sharp. It echoed through the quiet forest. Every hit made a small white mark on the dark bark. Bram watched them carefully to make sure the tree fell in the right direction. "It will take many hours to cut this and move it to the beach," Ilara noted. She looked back toward the path they came from. "We should work fast. The sun will go down soon." Silas nodded. He took an axe and joined the workers. He felt the sweat on his forehead and the strength in his arms. They were pirates, but today, they were woodsmen. They worked together, and the tall tree began to groan under their effort. The sun was high and very hot. Silas looked at the workers. They were tired. Their shirts were wet with sweat. Cutting a giant tree was very hard work. He knew they needed to drink. Their wooden barrels on the ship were almost empty. The water they had was warm and tasted like old wood. It was not good for the crew. "Ilara," Silas called. She stopped and looked at him. "Take Thomas and Sarah. We need fresh water. The crew cannot work if they are thirsty. Find a stream or a pond." Ilara nodded. She grabbed 3 empty leather bags and a small compass. Thomas and Sarah picked up their empty barrels. They left the sound of the axes behind and walked deeper into the green forest. The jungle was very thick. Large green leaves touched Ilara's face. She used her long knife to cut away the vines. The ground was covered in soft moss. It felt like a green carpet. Ilara stopped and listened. She did not hear the axes anymore. She only heard the birds and the wind in the high branches. "Listen," Ilara whispered. "Do you hear that?" Thomas tilted his head. "I hear the wind." "No," Ilara said. "Behind the wind. It is a soft, rushing sound." They moved toward the sound. The ground became wet and muddy. The smell of the air changed. It was no longer dry and dusty. It was cool and sweet. They pushed through a final wall of thick ferns and stopped. A beautiful stream of water ran over grey stones. The water was as clear as glass. It came from a small waterfall that fell from a high rock. The water hit a deep pool at the bottom. Small fish swam in the shadows of the rocks. The light of the sun hit the water and made it sparkle like diamonds. Fresh water. Sarah cried out. She ran to the edge of the pool. She put her hands into the water and splashed her face. It is cold and wonderful. Ilara knelt by the stream. She took a small sip. The water was sweet and very clean. It was the best thing she had tasted in a long time. They filled their leather bags and the small barrels. The water made a gentle bubbling sound as it filled the containers. "We must bring this back to the others," Ilara said. "But we should also remember this place. If the Navy finds the bay, we can hide here. This forest is deep and the water is plenty." They started the walk back to the clearing. The barrels were heavy, and the path was difficult, but they did not mind. They knew the fresh water would give the crew the strength they needed to finish the repairs. Ilara felt proud. She was a woman of the sea, but she was learning to navigate the land as well. When they finally returned to the clearing, the sound of the axes was still steady and strong. While Silas and his crew worked on the island, another ship moved across the blue ocean. This ship was much larger than the Royal Swift. It was the HMS Defender, the strongest ship in the King's Navy. It had 50 cannons and 300 sailors. Its sails were bright white and very clean. The ship moved with great power, cutting through the waves like a sharp knife. Admiral Thorne stood on the high deck. He was a tall man with very straight shoulders. He wore a dark blue coat with gold buttons that sparkled in the sun. His hair was grey, and his eyes were as cold as the deep sea. Thorne did not like pirates. He thought they were a sickness on the ocean. He wanted to clean the sea, and Silas Vane was his biggest target. To Thorne, this was not just a job, it was a mission from the king. "Any sign of them?" Thorne asked. His voice was sharp and very cold. A young officer walked toward him. He looked nervous. "No, Admiral. The storm was very big last night. Many ships probably sank in those giant waves. We have not seen a single sail on the horizon." Thorne looked out at the water with a long, brass spyglass. He moved the glass slowly across the horizon. "Silas Vane is a lucky man, but he is also a very good sailor. He did not sink. He is hiding somewhere, waiting for the wind to change." Suddenly, a sailor at the front of the ship shouted, "Debris in the water! To the left side!" The HMS Defender slowed down. A small boat went out to collect the object. It was a piece of white wood with gold paint. When they brought it to the deck, Thorne looked at it closely. The wood was broken and jagged, but he could see a few letters. It was a part of a ship's nameplate. He saw the letters Royal. "This is from the Royal Swift," Thorne said. He touched the wet wood with his gloved hand. The wood was still fresh. "They were here very recently. The storm broke their ship, just as I thought." He looked at his own map on a small table. He saw the small dot for Green Rock. It was the only island near this location. He knew Silas would need wood to fix a broken mast. He knew a sailor would look for a place with calm water and tall trees. Thorne smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a hunter who sees his prey. "Turn the ship toward the east," Thorne commanded. "Every sail must be open. We have them now." The HMS Defender turned gracefully. The giant sails caught the wind, and the ship began to move fast across the water. Thorne held the wooden rail tightly. He was not a man who enjoyed the beauty of the sea. He only enjoyed the victory. He imagined the Royal Swift sitting broken in a bay. He imagined the look on Silas Vane's face when the Navy arrived with all their cannons ready. On the island, the crew was still busy with the tall tree. They did not know that the king's best hunter was coming. The peaceful forest was no longer safe. The shadows were growing long, and a danger of iron and fire was approaching from the sea. The sun was starting to drop toward the sea. The sky was a mix of pink and soft gold. Silas and the crew were finally moving the new mast toward the beach. They used thick ropes and round pieces of wood to roll the heavy tree over the sand. It was slow work, but they were almost there. Silas stopped for a moment to wipe the sweat from his eyes. He looked at the water and saw something green floating near the shore. The object hit the sand with the movement of a small wave. It was a bottle made of thick, dark green glass. Silas walked over to it. The bottle was very old. It was covered in small white shells and green plants from the bottom of the ocean. It looked like it had been in the water for many, many years. "What do you have there, Silas?" Ilara asked. She walked over from the stream with the last of the water bags. "A message from the sea," Silas answered. He picked up the bottle. It was heavy. He could see a roll of dry paper inside. The top of the bottle was closed with a thick piece of cork. The cork was covered in black wax to keep the water out. Silas used his small knife to scrape away the wax. He pulled the cork out. It made a soft, dry sound as it came free. He turned the bottle upside down, and the paper slid into his hand. The paper was yellow and very thin. Silas opened it carefully. He did not want to break it. The writing was in dark ink, but the letters were a bit blurry. Ilara looked over his shoulder as he read the words aloud. "To the person who finds this," Silas began. "My name is Captain William Blackwood. My ship, the Night Star, is lost. We found the entrance to the Lost Sea, but the fog was too thick. The golden compass is real, but it is not a prize for the greedy. It is a key. If you seek the treasure, look for the stone eyes on the moving island. Do not trust the calm water. The sea has a memory." The letter ended there. There was a small drawing of a skull at the bottom. Silas felt a cold shiver on his back. Captain Blackwood was a legend. He was a great explorer who disappeared 20 years ago. Everyone thought his ship sank in a storm. "The stone eyes," Ilara whispered. "That must be the statue we saw on the map. The one in the jungle." Silas looked at the forest behind them. The trees looked darker now that the sun was low. Blackwood was a smart man. If he could not find the way, the journey must be very dangerous. "He says the compass is a key. A key to what?" "Maybe a key to more than just gold," Ilara suggested. "Maybe it is a key to the Lost Sea itself." Silas rolled the paper back up. He felt a new sense of urgency. The mystery was getting deeper. They had the wood for the ship and fresh water for the crew. But now they had a warning from a ghost. "We must finish the repairs tonight," Silas said to the crew. His voice was serious. "We are not just looking for gold anymore. We are following a path that very few men have ever survived. We leave at first light." The crew looked at the dark green bottle and the old letter. They felt the weight of the mystery. The island was quiet, but the message in the bottle made the silence feel heavy. The night was dark, but the beach was bright with the light of many torches. The crew worked together to lift the new silver pine mast into its place on the Royal Swift. Bram shouted directions, his voice deep and steady. The sound of the heavy wood sliding into the metal base of the ship was a low, powerful thud. It was a good sound. It meant the ship was becoming whole again. Silas and Ilara sat near a small fire on the sand. Silas held the old letter from Captain Blackwood in his hand. The paper felt like dry skin. Ilara looked at the flames, her face thoughtful. "Silas," she said quietly, "you said the golden compass is more than just gold. You said it is a key. What did your father tell you about it? Why did Blackwood say the sea has a memory?" Silas looked at the dark ocean. The waves made a soft, rhythmic sound as they hit the shore. "My father was a young man when he saw it," Silas began. "He was a sailor on a merchant ship. They were lost in a great fog, much like the one Blackwood described. A small boat approached them. An old man was inside. He held a compass made of pure, shining gold." Silas leaned forward. "This compass does not have a normal needle. It does not point to the North Pole. Instead, the needle moves toward the thing the person wants most in the world. If you want gold, it shows you the way to a mountain of jewels. If you want a person, it leads you to their door." Ilara looked surprised. "A magic compass? I thought it was just a name for a very expensive tool." "It is an ancient thing," Silas continued. "The legend says it was made by a king who loved the sea more than his land. But there is a price. The compass only works for a captain who is brave enough to face his own fears. That is why Blackwood mentioned the stone eyes. The island where the compass is hidden is not a static place. It moves. It is guarded by things that are not human." "And the memory of the sea?" Ilara asked. "The sea remembers the people who try to steal its secrets," Silas explained. "It creates storms and fog to protect the compass. My father said the air on that island is full of voices. It is a place where the past and the future meet. That is why we need the second piece of the map. The first piece shows the location, but the second piece tells you how to survive the Guardians." Ilara watched the crew on the ship. They looked like small shadows against the torchlight. "They think we are just looking for gold to buy houses and fine clothes. If they knew the truth, would they stay? They are pirates." "Ilara," Silas said with a small smile. "They love a good story, but they love a challenge even more. We will tell them when the time is right. For now, they need to believe in the treasure." He stood up and brushed the sand from his trousers. "The ship is almost ready. Tomorrow, we sail for Tortuga. We must find Barnaby and the rest of the map before the King's Navy finds us. The legend is calling, and we cannot keep it waiting." The next morning, the crew was ready to sail. The Royal Swift looked strong with its new silver pine mast. The white sails were tied neatly, and the deck was clean. However, Silas was not ready to leave the island yet. He stood on the beach and looked at the map. He looked at the old letter from Captain Blackwood. Then, he looked at the high, green mountain in the center of the island. "The map has a symbol here," Silas said. He pointed to a small, hand-drawn face on the corner of the leather. "It matches the shape of that big rock near the top of the hill. I think the first clue is not on the sea. I think it is here, on green rock." Ilara looked at the mountain. It was very steep and covered in thick trees. "If the clue is up there, we should find it before the Navy arrives. We do not know when Admiral Thorne will find this bay." Silas agreed. He chose Bram and Ilara to go with him. They carried their swords and a small bag of food. They left the beach and entered the forest again. This time, they did not stay near the stream. They climbed higher and higher. The air became thinner, and the ground was slippery with wet leaves and moss. After 2 hours of climbing, they reached a flat area near the top of the mountain. The trees were shorter here, and the wind was much stronger. Silas stopped and pushed away some large, heavy ferns. Behind the plants, there was a wall of grey stone. But it was not a normal wall. It was carved by human hands. In the center of the wall was a giant statue. It was the face of a man with a long beard and a crown made of sea shells. The statue was very old. Green plants grew in the cracks of the stone. The most interesting part was the eyes. The eyes were two large, round stones that looked like they were watching the path. The stone eyes. Ilara whispered. She touched the cold rock, just like Blackwood said in his letter. Silas looked closely at the statue's chest. There was a small, square hole in the stone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the piece of yellow paper he found in the bottle. He compared the drawing on the paper to the statue. They were a perfect match. This statue is a guardian, Silas said. It marks the start of the path to the lost sea. Look at where the eyes are pointing. Bram walked to the front of the statue. He looked in the direction of the statue's gaze. The eyes were pointing toward a dark opening in the side of the mountain. It was the entrance to a cave. The air coming from the cave was cold and smelled like very old dust. We found it, Silas said. His heart beat fast with excitement. This is not just an island for wood. This is a doorway. The first clue is inside that cave. The three of them stood before the dark entrance. They knew the journey was becoming more than just a pirate trip. They were entering a place of legends. Silas took a deep breath and led the way into the dark. The cave was not just a hole in the mountain. As Silas walked inside with a torch, he saw that the walls were made of smooth, flat stones. It was a temple. The air was very old and dry. It made Silas cough. The light from his torch danced on the walls. He saw more drawings of ships and the sea. "Stay close to me," Silas whispered. His voice was low and serious. "This place is very old. The floor might not be safe." Ilara walked behind him. She looked at the floor very carefully. She saw that some of the stones were slightly higher than the others. They were arranged in a pattern. "Stop, Silas," she said. She pointed to a square stone in front of his boot. "Do not step on the dark stones. I think they are part of a trap." Bram leaned down. He was a carpenter, so he understood how things were built. He touched the edge of a stone with his finger. "She is right, Captain. If you put weight on this stone, it will move. I can see the space between the rocks. There is a mechanism underneath." They moved slowly. They stepped only on the light-colored stones. It was like a game, but a very dangerous one. Silas held the torch high. The hallway opened into a large, round room. In the center of the room was a small stone table. On top of the table was a box made of dark wood and iron. "The box," Silas said. He started to walk toward it. Suddenly, Bram grabbed his arm. "Wait. Look at the ceiling." Silas looked up. Above the stone table, there were hundreds of sharp, heavy stones hanging by thin metal chains. The chains looked very old and rusty. If someone touched the table, the chains would probably break. The heavy stones would fall and crush anyone in the room. "We must be very fast and very light," Ilara said. She took a deep breath. She was the lightest person in the group. "I will go. Silas, hold the torch near the table so I can see." Ilara moved across the room. She was as quiet as a cat. She reached the table and looked at the box. It was not locked. She opened it slowly. Inside, there was a small, silver plate with more star coordinates carved into it. She grabbed the plate and stepped back. As she moved away, a small piece of dust fell from the ceiling. A sharp sound of metal stretching filled the room. The chains began to shake. "Run!" Silas shouted. They ran back toward the entrance. They jumped over the dark stones on the floor. Behind them, the heavy stones from the ceiling fell with a massive, shaking noise. The floor of the temple broke under the weight. Dust and gray smoke filled the hallway. They reached the cave entrance just as the path behind them disappeared. They stood in the bright sunlight, breathing hard. Ilara held up the silver plate. It sparkled in the sun. "We have the coordinates," she said with a smile. "But I do not want to go back inside." Silas, Ilara, and Bram ran down the mountain as fast as they could. The silver plate was heavy in Ilara's bag, but they did not stop to look at it. They pushed through the thick ferns and jumped over fallen trees. Silas's heart was beating fast. He had a bad feeling in his stomach. The air felt heavy, and the birds in the jungle were suddenly very quiet. When they reached the edge of the forest, Silas stopped. He looked out at the beautiful blue bay. His eyes went wide. The Royal Swift was there, but it was not alone. A giant ship with 3 tall masts and many white sails was entering the harbor. It was the HMS Defender. The gold buttons on the soldiers' coats sparkled in the afternoon sun. "Admiral Thorne," Silas whispered. His voice was full of anger. "He found us faster than I expected." On the deck of the Royal Swift, Mara was waving her arms. She saw Silas on the beach and pointed at the Navy ship. The crew was already moving. They were pulling the small boats toward the ship. They knew they were in great danger. A ship at anchor is an easy target for cannons. "We have to move," Silas shouted. The 3 of them ran across the white sand. They pushed their small wooden boat into the water and began to row with all their strength. The oars hit the water again and again. Behind them, the HMS Defender was getting closer. A large cloud of white smoke came from the side of the Navy ship. A moment later, a heavy iron ball hit the water near Silas's boat. A giant wave of salty water splashed over them. "They are shooting at us," Bram yelled. He pulled the oar so hard the wood groaned. "Keep rowing," Silas commanded. They reached the side of the Royal Swift. Silas climbed up the rope ladder first and helped Ilara and Bram. The rest of the crew was already at their stations. Thomas and Sarah were holding the ropes for the new silver pine mast. The ship was ready to sail, but the anchor was still deep in the sandy floor of the bay. "Do not lift the anchor," Silas ordered. "There is no time. Take your axes and cut the rope." Mara and Thomas ran to the front of the ship. They swung their heavy axes. The thick, salty rope snapped with a sharp sound. The Royal Swift was suddenly free. The wind caught the sails, and the ship began to move. Another iron ball flew through the air. It passed high above the deck and hit the trees on the island. The sound of breaking branches echoed across the water. Silas ran to the steering wheel. He turned it hard to the left. He wanted to use the rocks near the edge of the bay to hide his ship. The Royal Swift was fast. Even with the damage from the storm, the new mast held strong. The ship glided through the water like a fish. Admiral Thorne's ship was much larger and slower. It could not follow them through the narrow opening of the bay. Silas looked back. He saw Admiral Thorne standing on the deck of the HMS Defender. The Admiral was watching them through a brass spyglass. Silas knew this was not the end. The hunt was just beginning. But for now, they were free. They had the coordinates, and they had their lives. The Royal Swift flew across the water. The new silver pine mast was strong, and the ship felt faster than ever. However, Silas knew they could not stay on the open sea for long. Every time he looked back, he saw the white sails of the HMS Defender on the horizon. Admiral Thorne was not stopping. He was like a hungry shark following a scent in the water. "He is still there, Silas," Ilara said. She was standing at the back of the ship, looking through her brass spyglass. "He is gaining a little ground. His ship has more sails and more men to work them." Silas gripped the wooden steering wheel. "We cannot outrun him forever in a straight line. We need to hide. We need a place where a giant ship like the Defender cannot go. He looked at the silver plate they had taken from the mountain temple. There were strange markings on the edge of the plate. They were not just coordinates. They were shapes of coastlines. Silas compared the shapes to the land in front of them. To the west, there was a long line of very high, grey cliffs. The stone walls looked solid and dangerous. There was no beach and no obvious place to land. The map shows a silent pocket near these cliffs. Silas said. He pointed toward the grey stone walls. It is a hidden harbour. If we find it, Thorn will sail right past us. But it looks like a solid wall of rock. Mara shouted from the front of the deck. Trust the map. Silas replied. And trust me. The Royal Swift turned toward the cliffs. The crew was nervous. They could hear the heavy sound of the ocean hitting the rocks. The white foam of the water jumped high into the air. It looked like the ship was going to crash into the stone. Silas did not slow down. He watched the shadows on the cliff face very carefully. Suddenly, he saw it. There was a narrow crack in the grey stone. It was very thin, and it was hidden by a large, leaning rock. From a distance, it looked like part of the cliff, but as they got closer, Silas saw the dark blue water moving between the stones. Pull in the sails. Silas commanded. Now. We must be slow. The crew worked fast. The ship lost its speed and glided quietly toward the crack. The space was very tight. On both sides of the ship, the grey stone walls were so close that Silas could almost touch them with his hands. The sound of the water echoing in the narrow passage was loud and hollow. After a minute of slow movement, the passage opened up. They entered a large, round cove. The water here was perfectly still and as green as an emerald. High cliffs surrounded the cove on all sides, blocking the wind and the sun. It was a secret world. Drop the anchor softly. Silas whispered. The heavy metal hit the water with a dull, quiet sound. The Royal Swift stopped in the center of the cove. A few minutes later, they heard a distant noise. It was the sound of the HMS Defender sailing past the cliffs on the outside. The Navy ship was moving fast, unaware that its prey was resting just a few meters away behind the stone wall. Silas let out a long breath. They were safe for now. The secret cove was the perfect hiding place. The silence of the secret cove was very peaceful. For a few hours, the pirates felt safe. The water was so still that it looked like a mirror. The crew sat on the deck and cleaned their equipment. Some men fixed the ropes, while others sharpened their swords. Silas stood with Alara near the captain's table. They were looking at the silver plate and the leather map. We are safe here for the night, Silas said. He felt the tension leave his shoulders. Thorn is a good sailor, but he cannot see through stone. He will search the open sea and find nothing. Ilara traced the lines on the silver plate. I hope you are right, Silas. But Thorn is a hunter. Hunters do not give up easily. Suddenly, a sharp cry came from the front of the ship. Mara was standing on the wooden rail, pointing her finger toward the narrow opening in the cliffs. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. Captain! Look at the entrance. Silas ran to the front of the ship. He pulled his brass spyglass from his belt and looked through the narrow crack in the stone. His heart sank. He did not see the open blue ocean. Instead, he saw the dark hull of a massive ship. Then, a second ship moved into view. Finally, a third ship appeared. It was not just the HMS Defender. Two smaller Navy vessels had joined the Admiral. The three ships were moving slowly and carefully. They stopped right in front of the narrow passage. Silas heard the distant, heavy sound of metal chains moving as the Navy ships dropped their anchors. The three ships formed a solid wall of wood, iron, and cannons. He knew. Silas whispered. He did not sail past us. He was waiting for us to hide. Admiral Thorn had played a very smart game. He knew Silas would look for a place to disappear. He had followed the Royal Swift at a distance and watched them enter the silent pocket. Now, the Navy held the only exit. The high stone walls of the cove, which felt like a protection before, now felt like the walls of a prison. "What do we do, Captain?" Bram asked. The big carpenter held his heavy hammer tightly. The rest of the crew gathered on the deck. They looked at the giant Navy ships through the gap. They knew they could not fight 3 ships at once in such a small space. If we try to sail out, they will destroy us with their cannons. Ilara said, "We are sitting ducks in this cove." Silas looked up at the high, grey cliffs. They were too steep to climb. He looked at the narrow entrance. The HMS Defender was pointing its heavy guns directly at the gap. One move, and the Royal Swift would be broken into pieces. "Thorn wants me to surrender," Silas said. His voice was cold. "He wants to see me in chains again. He is waiting for us to get hungry and tired. He thinks he has won." Silas turned away from the entrance and looked at his crew. They were afraid, but they were still looking to him for an answer. He needed to be more than a captain now. He needed to be a ghost. "We are not surrendering," Silas promised. "The night is coming. In the dark, even a trap has a hole. We just have to find it." The sun went down, and the secret cove became very dark. Silas ordered the crew to put out all the torches and candles. He did not want a single spark of light to show where they were. The sky was filled with heavy clouds, so there was no moon or stars to help the Navy soldiers see. Silas called his crew together on the deck. "We cannot sail out of here," Silas whispered. "The wind is too light inside these walls, and the Navy will see the white fabric of our sails. We must move the ship like a ghost." He looked at Ilara and Bram. "We will use the 2 small boats. Wrap old clothes around the oars. This will make the wood quiet when it hits the water. We will pull the Royal Swift through the gap." The crew worked in total silence. They took old shirts and rags and tied them tightly around the middle of the oars. They lowered the small boats into the water very slowly. 8 strong sailors, including Bram and Mara, climbed into the boats. They tied long, thick ropes from the small boats to the front of the Royal Swift. Silas stood at the steering wheel. He could not see much, but he knew every inch of his ship. Ilara stood at the very front of the ship. She looked through the dark toward the narrow crack in the cliffs. She used a small piece of dark wood to signal the boats. The sailors began to row. Because of the cloth on the oars, the water did not make a splashing noise. It was a soft, rhythmic sound. Slowly, the Royal Swift began to move. Silas felt the ship glide forward. There were no sails to catch the wind, so the ship was silent. They reached the narrow passage. The grey stone walls were very close. Silas could hear the water moving against the rocks. He held the wheel with steady hands. If the ship hit the stone, the noise would wake up every soldier on the Navy ships. As they moved into the gap, Silas saw the yellow lanterns of the HMS Defender. The giant ship was sitting right in front of them, less than 50 meters away. He could see the silhouettes of the guards on its deck. One guard was walking back and forth, holding a long musket. Silas held his breath. A small bird flew off the cliff and made a sudden noise in the air. The guard on the Defender stopped. He turned his head and looked toward the dark gap in the rocks. Silas froze. The sailors in the small boats stopped rowing. For a long minute, no one moved. The only sound was the distant calling of the ocean waves. The guard finally turned away and continued his walk. He thought the noise was just the wind. "Move." Silas signaled silently. The small boats pulled again. The Royal Swift moved past the edge of the cliffs and into the open water. They stayed in the deep shadows of the coast for as long as possible. Once they were a safe distance from the Navy ships, Silas gave the final order. "Raise the sails." He whispered. The crew pulled the ropes. The black flag and the white sails caught the night wind. The ship jumped forward, moving away from the trap. Admiral Thorne was still waiting at the entrance of the cove, watching an empty harbor. Silas looked back one last time and smiled. The night had saved them. The Royal Swift moved quickly across the silver water. The sun was not yet up, but the sky was turning a soft purple color. Silas and Elara were in the captain's cabin. The room was quiet, except for the sound of the ocean against the ship's sides. Silas sat at the large wooden desk. He looked at the first piece of the map and the silver plate they found in the cave. "The coordinates on the plate are clear," Silas said. He rubbed his tired eyes. "But the path to the Lost Sea is still a mystery. My father said there were 2 pieces of the map. I have the first one, but I thought Barnaby in Tortuga had the second one." Elara did not answer. She was looking at the desk. It was a very old desk made of dark, heavy oak. It had many small drawers and beautiful carvings of sea monsters on the sides. She ran her fingers along the edge of the wood. She was a navigator, and she had a very good eye for small details. "Silas," she said, "look at this carving of the whale. It is slightly different from the carving on the other side." Silas leaned forward. He saw the 2 whales. One whale had a small, round eye made of dark wood. The other whale had no eye at all. Elara pressed the small wooden eye. There was no loud noise, but she felt something move inside the desk. A small, thin drawer slid out from the side of the desk. Silas had lived on this ship for weeks and had never seen it. "I found it," Elara whispered. She reached into the hidden space and pulled out a small roll of paper. The paper was very old and thin. It was tied with a piece of red string. Silas untied the string with trembling hands. He opened the paper and laid it flat on the desk. It was the second piece of the map. It was much smaller than the first piece, but it was full of information. "This is not a map of the whole ocean," Silas noted. "It is a map of a specific place. Look at these rocks. They look like teeth." Elara looked at the drawing. "Those are the Devil's Teeth rocks near Tortuga. And this building here is the old lighthouse. It has been empty for 50 years. The paper also had a few lines of writing. The path is not in the water. The path is in the light. Go to the high tower when the moon is full. Give the silver to the one who waits in the shadows." This must be the second part of the clue, Silas said. He felt a surge of hope. The silver plate from the cave is not just for reading. We must take it to the old lighthouse in Tortuga. Someone is there, waiting for us. Elara looked at Silas. Her eyes were bright with excitement. "Barnaby. He must be the one in the shadows. He is not just a retired pirate. He is the guardian of the final secret." Silas rolled the papers up carefully. He felt a new sense of direction. They were not just sailing to Tortuga to hide. They were sailing there to find the final key. The mystery of the Golden Compass was starting to come together. "Tell the crew to turn the ship," Silas commanded. "We are heading for Tortuga. We have a meeting with a ghost at the old lighthouse." The Royal Swift arrived at Tortuga under a dark, cloudy sky. Silas did not go to the main harbor this time. He did not want any more fights in the tavern. Instead, he steered the ship toward the north side of the island. This part of Tortuga was rocky and dangerous. High above the water, the old lighthouse stood on a sharp cliff. It was a tall, grey tower that had not seen a fire in 50 years. "Wait here with the crew," Silas told Mara and Bram. Ilara and I will go to the tower. Keep the ship ready to move. If you see a blue light from the cliff, come and get us." Silas and Ilara climbed into a small boat and rowed to the shore. The waves hit the rocks with a heavy, rhythmic sound. They found a narrow path that moved up the side of the cliff like a snake. The wind was strong and cold. It pulled at their clothes and made the grass move in waves. Finally, they reached the base of the lighthouse. The wooden door was old and had many holes. Silas pushed the door. It opened. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of dry wood. Silas lit a small lantern. The light showed a spiral staircase made of stone. They climbed the stairs slowly. Their boots made a soft, hollow sound on the cold steps. At the very top of the tower, they found a small room. The glass windows were broken, and the wind whistled through the gaps. An old man sat in a heavy wooden chair. He had a very long, white beard and a face that looked like a dry map. He wore an old pirate coat that was too big for him. A wooden leg rested on a stool in front of him. This was Barnaby, the man who knew the final secrets of the sea. "I knew you would come, Silas Vane," the old man said. His voice was thin and shaky, like dry leaves in the wind. "You have your father's eyes, and you have his hunger for the horizon." "Barnaby," Silas said. He stepped into the light of the lantern. "I have the map, and I have the silver plate from the mountain temple. My father said you were the only one who could read it." Barnaby looked at Ilara, then back at Silas. He reached out a shaking hand. Silas placed the silver plate in the old man's palm. Barnaby held it up to the faint light of the moon. He touched the carved stars with his fingers. A small, sad smile appeared on his face. "The golden compass is a dangerous dream, boy," Barnaby whispered. "It took your father's piece, and it took my leg. But the path is here. The silver plate is not just a map. It is a key for the light." Barnaby pointed to a metal stand in the center of the room. It was the place where the giant lighthouse lamp used to sit. "Place the silver plate there," he commanded. "When the moon hits the silver, it will show you the true way to the lost sea. But be careful. Once you see the path, the sea will know you are coming." Silas felt a chill in the air. He moved toward the metal stand, holding the silver plate tightly. The final part of the journey was almost visible. The Royal Swift sailed away from the cliffs of Tortuga. The moon was big and round in the sky. It made the ocean look like a sheet of silver. Silas stood at the wheel, but his mind was not on the waves. He was thinking about the words of old Barnaby. The path to the lost sea was finally clear in his head. He felt a mix of excitement and a strange, cold fear. "The crew is quiet tonight," Ilara said. She walked up to the high deck and stood next to Silas. She looked at the sailors on the lower deck. Most of them were resting or talking in low voices. "They know we are close to the end of the journey. They are nervous." "They should be," Silas replied. "The lost sea is not a friendly place." Suddenly, Silas saw something strange. From the front of the ship, near the large wooden barrels, there was a quick flash of light. It was very small and very fast. It was not the light of a star, and it was not a reflection of the moon. It looked like a signal. A few seconds later, there was another flash. Silas gave the wheel to Ilara. "Stay here," he whispered. "Do not make a sound." He took off his heavy boots and moved across the wooden deck in his socks. He was as silent as a cat. He moved behind the shadows of the masts and the coils of thick rope. He reached the front of the ship and looked behind a large pile of wooden crates. He saw a man. It was Thomas, one of the sailors they had recruited in Tortuga. Thomas was holding a small, polished metal mirror. He was standing near the rail and moving the mirror to catch the moonlight. He was pointing the reflection toward the dark horizon behind the ship. Silas stepped out of the shadows. "Who are you talking to, Thomas?" Silas asked. His voice was low and very dangerous. Thomas jumped. He dropped the metal mirror. His face turned very pale in the moonlight. He tried to hide a small piece of paper in his pocket, but Silas was faster. Silas grabbed Thomas's wrist with a grip like iron. I was just looking at the moon, Captain," Thomas said. His voice was shaking. Silas pulled the paper from Thomas's hand. He held it up to the light. It was a small map of their current location with a list of their supplies. At the bottom, there was a signature, "Property of the King's Navy. You are a spy," Silas said. The anger in his chest felt like a hot fire. "Admiral Thorne paid you to tell him where we are. You have been leading him to us this whole time." The mirror hitting the deck brought the rest of the crew. Bram, Mara, and the others gathered around. They looked at Thomas with angry eyes. They had worked hard and risked their lives, and now they found a traitor among them. "What do we do with him, Captain?" Bram asked. He looked at the dark water of the ocean. The law of the sea is very clear about traitors. Thomas fell to his knees. "Please, Captain. Thorne has my brother in prison. He said he would kill him if I did not help. I had no choice." Silas looked at the paper and then at the horizon. He knew the Navy was out there, watching for the flashes of light. The trap was closing again, but this time, the danger was inside his own ship. The deck of the Royal Swift was lit by the orange glow of two large torches. The crew stood in a wide circle. No one spoke. The only sound was the wind in the sails and the steady movement of the ship through the waves. In the center of the circle, Thomas sat on the wooden floor. His hands were tied behind his back with thick rope. He looked at his boots, too ashamed to look at his friends. Silas stood in front of him. He held the small metal mirror and the navy paper in his hands. He looked at his crew. These were men and women who had left their homes to follow him. They had fought storms and escaped prisons together. To a pirate, loyalty was more valuable than gold. "We live by a code," Silas began. His voice was deep and reached every corner of the deck. "We are not a king's army. We do not have a country. We only have this ship and each other. The pirate code says that a man who betrays his crew betrays himself. The punishment for a traitor is to be left on a desert island with no food and no water. Throw him to the sharks," Bram shouted. He hit the wooden rail with his heavy fist. "He put all our lives in danger. Because of him, Thorne is right behind us." "He is a rat," Mara added. She reached for the small knife at her belt. "He does not deserve to stay on this ship." Thomas looked up. Tears were running down his face. "I am not a rat. I love this ship. But the Admiral has my brother in a dark cell in Port Royal. He told me he would hang him if I did not send the signals. I am a bad pirate, but I am a good brother. What would you do, Silas? Would you let your family die?" The crew became quiet. Many of them had families they had not seen in years. They understood the pain in Thomas's voice. Silas looked at Ilara. She was the most logical member of the crew. She looked at Thomas with a mix of pity and anger. "It does not matter why he did it," Ilara said firmly. "The Navy knows our location. Every flash of that mirror was a step closer to our deaths. If we keep him, we are keeping a spy. If we kill him, we are no better than Thorne." Silas walked around Thomas. He thought about the mission and the golden compass. He thought about the old man in the lighthouse and the secret coordinates. He knew that anger was a bad teacher. He needed to be a leader, not a judge. "I will not kill you," Thomas. Silas said finally. The crew began to grumble, but Silas held up his hand. And I will not leave you on an island to die. But you are no longer a member of this crew. You will stay in the storage room under the deck. You will be tied to a heavy barrel. You will eat bread and water, and you will stay in the dark. Silas leaned down so he was close to Thomas's face. And you are going to help us. You are going to send one last signal with your mirror. But this time, you will tell the Navy that we are heading east toward the rocks. We will actually go west. If you lie to me again, I will not be so kind. Thomas nodded quickly. I will do it, Captain. I promise. Bram and Mara grabbed Thomas by his arms and led him away. Silas watched them go. He felt the weight of his decision. He was a pirate, but he wanted to be a man of honor. The trial was over, but the danger from the Navy was still very real. The Royal Swift turned away from the Navy ships. Thomas had sent the false signal, and the lights of the HMS Defender moved away toward the rocky east. Silas did not feel happy yet. He knew the hardest part of the journey was just ahead. The air was getting colder. The smell of the ocean changed. It did not smell like salt anymore. It smelled like old ice. Look ahead, Captain, Ilara said. She stood at the front of the ship and pointed into the distance. A giant wall of white fog was waiting for them. It looked like a solid mountain of clouds sitting on the water. It was so thick that Silas could not see the waves in front of the ship. He did not slow down. He knew the golden compass was hidden somewhere behind that white wall. Everyone, be silent. Silas commanded. No talking. No moving of heavy barrels. We must listen to the sea. The ship entered the fog. In an instant, the world disappeared. Silas could not see the masts of his own ship. He could not see his own hands on the steering wheel. Everything was white and very quiet. The sound of the wind stopped. The sound of the water against the wood became a soft, hollow thud. It felt like the ship was flying through a giant cloud. The silver plate. Ilara whispered. She was standing next to Silas now. She held the silver plate they found in the temple. The plate began to change. The carved stars on the metal were glowing with a soft, blue light. The light was small, but in the white fog, it was very bright. The needle on the plate moved slowly to the left. Follow the light, Ilara said. The plate is showing us the path through the fog. If we turn away, we will be lost for a very long time. Silas turned the wheel slowly. He felt a strange power in the wood. The ship seemed to move by itself. The fog was thick and wet. It made the deck slippery and the ropes heavy. Silas felt like he was in a dream. He thought about the ghost ship in the old stories. Were they becoming ghosts too? How long does this fog last? Bram asked from the shadows. His voice was a low, tired rumble. As long as the sea wants. Silas answered. They sailed for hours in the white silence. The crew sat on the deck, watching the blue light of the silver plate. They were no longer in the Caribbean they knew. They were in the lost sea. Suddenly, the air felt different. The thick fog started to move and pull apart. A dark shape appeared in the distance. It was not an island. It was another ship. But it was not moving. It sat perfectly still in the white air, waiting for them. The Royal Swift moved closer to the dark shape. It was a giant wooden ship, but it had no lights and no signs of life. The sails were torn and hung like grey ghosts in the light wind. Silas held his breath. He saw no people on the deck. He saw no movement in the windows of the captain's cabin. The ship sat in the white fog like a dead animal in the water. Is it a Navy ship, Captain? Mara asked in a very low whisper. She held her sword tightly, her eyes wide with worry. No, Silas answered, "Look at the wood. It is grey and old. The metal is covered in rust. This ship has been in the fog for many, many years." He steered the Royal Swift until it was right next to the mysterious vessel. The two ships touched with a soft, grinding sound of wood against wood. Silas signaled to Ilara and Bram. They prepared a rope bridge. Silas wanted to see what was inside. They needed to know if this ship had any clues about the Golden Compass. "I will go first," Silas said. He jumped over the rail and landed on the deck of the ghost ship. The deck was covered in a thick layer of white salt. It was very slippery. Silas walked slowly toward the center of the ship. Everything was quiet. He did not hear any voices or any footsteps. He only heard the soft movement of the ropes in the wind. He looked at the name on the back of the ship. The letters were almost gone, but he could read them. The Wanderer. This ship was famous. Ilara said as she joined him. She looked at the broken masts. "My grandfather told me stories about the Wanderer. It went missing 30 years ago. People said it found a mountain of silver and never came back." They walked to the captain's room. The door was open, and it moved back and forth with a slow, heavy sound. Inside, the room was a mess. Papers were scattered on the floor, and a wooden chair was broken in the corner. Silas walked to the desk. He found a small wooden box and a book with a leather cover. Bram opened the box. "Look, Captain. Supplies." Inside the box, there were several bags of salt, some dried beans, and a small bottle of medicine. It was very old, but the salt and beans were still good to eat. In the lost sea, food was as valuable as gold. Silas picked up the book. It was the captain's log. The pages were yellow and wet from the fog. He turned to the very last page. The writing was messy, as if the person was in a great hurry. "The fog does not let us go," the message said. "We have been in the white air for 40 days. The food is almost gone. We saw the golden compass in our dreams, but we could not find the stone eyes. If you find this ship, do not stay in the fog. The fog is not just weather. It is a trap." Silas felt a cold chill in his bones. He looked at Ilara. "We must take the supplies and leave now. This ship is a warning." They quickly moved the bags of salt and beans to the Royal Swift. As they sailed away, the ghost ship disappeared back into the thick white fog. Silas stood at the wheel, his heart heavy. He knew they were on the right path, but he also knew that the sea did not want them to win. The blue light on the silver plate began to pulse like a heartbeat. Every time it flashed, a soft humming sound vibrated through the metal. Silas held the wheel tightly, his eyes searching the white void. Suddenly, the air turned warm. The smell of old ice vanished, replaced by the scent of tropical flowers and salt. The fog didn't just lift. It tore apart like a curtain being pulled by giant hands. "Look!" Ilara cried out, pointing toward the horizon. In front of them sat an island, but it was not like green rock or Tortuga. This island was made of dark, jagged volcanic stone and bright, neon green vines. It sat alone in a sea of perfectly still, black water. Most strangely, the island was moving. It drifted slowly across the water, leaving a wide, swirling wake behind it. Despite there being no wind, it moves against the current. Bram whispered, his face full of wonder and fear. "That is not possible. Land does not walk upon the water. It is the moving island." Silas said, his voice steady, "The place from my father's stories. The place Blackwood died trying to find." As the Royal Swift drew closer, the crew saw two massive pillars of rock standing at the entrance of a natural harbor. At the top of each pillar was a giant stone face, identical to the one they had found in the mountain temple on Green Rock. These were the true stone eyes. As the ship passed between the pillars, The giant stone eyelids seemed to shift, watching the pirates enter their domain. "The water is too deep to anchor," Mara shouted from the side. She had dropped a weighted rope, but it never hit the bottom. "We have to tie the ship to those vines on the shore." Silas steered the ship toward a shelf of black rock. The island groaned as it moved, a deep sound that rumbled in the floorboards of the Royal Swift. It felt like they were landing on the back of a giant, sleeping beast. "Bram, stay with the ship," Silas ordered. "Keep the cannons loaded. If this island decides to sink or move too fast, I want the crew ready to sail in an instant. Ilara, you're with me. Bring the silver plate and the map." They jumped from the ship onto the black stone. The ground felt strange. It wasn't solid like normal Earth. It had a slight vibration, a steady rhythm that matched the pulsing light of the silver plate. "The compass is here, Ilara," Silas said, looking toward a high peak in the center of the island where a golden light was glowing faintly against the dark sky. "I can feel it. It's like it's calling to the blood in my veins." "We aren't the only ones who heard the call," Ilara whispered, pointing back toward the fog they had just escaped. A single, dark shape was emerging from the white mist. It was the HMS Defender. Admiral Thorne had not been fooled by the traitor's signal for long. He had followed them into the fog, and now he was closing the distance. The final race for the golden compass had begun. The black rock of the island was sharp as broken glass. Silas and Ilara climbed higher, their breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Every few minutes, the ground beneath them shifted with a loud, metallic groan, as if the island were made of giant gears instead of soil and stone. "The Navy is landing," Ilara shouted over the wind. She pointed back down toward the harbor. 6 small boats, filled with red-coated soldiers and gleaming muskets, were rowing toward the black shore. At the front of the lead boat stood Admiral Thorne. Even from this distance, Silas could see the determination in the man's posture. Thorne didn't want the gold. He wanted the order and control that the compass could provide for the king. "We have to move faster," Silas said, pulling himself up a steep ledge. The path ahead was blocked by a wall of thick, glowing vines. They were a bright, bioluminescent green and pulsed in time with the silver plate in Silas's pocket. As he reached out to move one, the vine curled around his wrist like a snake. It wasn't trying to hurt him. It felt more like a heartbeat, checking who he was. "They're alive, Ilara," Silas whispered, pulling his hand back as the vines slowly untwined and moved aside, forming a natural doorway. "The island is testing us." Beyond the vines, the terrain changed. The black rock gave way to a path made of pure white quartz. At the end of the path was the peak, a hollowed-out crater that glowed with an intense, golden light. Obstacles on the peak. Shifting stones. The white quartz path was not solid. It floated on a sea of slow-moving lava, requiring Silas and Ilara to jump from one moving platform to another. The whispering wind. As they got closer to the peak, the wind began to sound like voices. It whispered names of lost sailors and forgotten treasures, trying to distract them from their footing. The Navy sharpshooters. A musket echoed through the air. A lead ball hit the stone inches from Silas's foot. Thorne's men were already at the base of the climb. "Leave the plate. Vane." Thorne's voice boomed from below, amplified by the crater's walls. "You cannot escape this island. Surrender now, and I may spare your crew." Silas didn't look back. He reached the edge of the golden crater. Inside was a temple made of solid gold, its walls covered in ancient carvings of the stars. In the very center, sitting on a pedestal of clear crystal, was the golden compass. It was beautiful, spinning slowly in midair without any support. "We're here," Ilara breathed, her eyes reflecting the gold light. But as Silas stepped toward the pedestal, the ground didn't groan, it roared. The entire island began to tilt. They weren't just on a moving island. They were on the back of something that was finally waking up. The crater floor didn't just tilt, it split. From the center of the Golden Temple, a massive figure rose, constructed from the very materials of the island. Its limbs were made of black volcanic glass, and its veins were the glowing green vines that had guided Silas earlier. It had no face, only two burning gold lights where eyes should be. This was the Sentinel, the final guardian of the king's legacy. "It's not an island," Ilara whispered, backing away. "It's a machine. A living machine." The Sentinel raised a massive arm, and the air in the crater grew heavy, making it hard to move. It didn't attack immediately. Instead, a voice echoed inside Silas's head, a sound like crashing waves and grinding sand. "Why do you seek the heart of the sea, Captain? Do you seek to rule the waves, or to find your way home?" Before Silas could answer, a loud crack echoed through the chamber. A musket ball struck the Sentinel's shoulder, shattering a piece of black glass. Admiral Thorn stepped into the light of the crater, his sword drawn and 50 soldiers behind him. "Step aside, Vane," Thorn commanded. "That artifact belongs to the crown. It is too powerful for a common thief to hold." "It's not an artifact, Thorn," Silas shouted back. "It's a test. If you take it by force, the island will sink us all." Thorn ignored him. "Soldiers, fire!" A volley of lead slammed into the Sentinel. The creature roared, a sound that shook the very foundation of the island. The green vines on its body began to glow a violent, angry red. It swept its massive arm across the chamber, sending a wave of force that knocked the soldiers off their feet. "Silas, the compass," Ilara pointed. While the Sentinel was distracted by the navy, the golden compass began to spin faster. The golden light was blinding. Silas realized that the Sentinel wasn't just guarding the compass. It was powered by it. He didn't pull his sword. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver plate and his father's old map. "I don't want to rule the sea," Silas yelled, looking directly into the Sentinel's burning eyes. "I want the freedom my father never had. I want to sail where the maps end." The Sentinel froze. The red glow in its vines faded back to a calm, pulsing green. It looked at Silas, then at the screaming admiral who was ordering his men to reload. With a movement faster than any human, the Sentinel reached out. It didn't crush Silas. It placed a massive, stone finger against the silver plate in his hand. A spark of blue energy jumped from the plate to the compass. The spinning slowed. The light softened. The compass floated down from its pedestal and landed gently in Silas's open palm. "No!" Thorn screamed, rushing forward with his sword. But the island had made its choice. The ground beneath the Navy soldiers began to liquefy into soft, black sand. They were being pulled down, not to their deaths, but back toward the shore. The Sentinel turned its gaze toward Thorn, and the Admiral suddenly found he couldn't move his feet. "The sea has a memory, Thorn," Silas said, clutching the cool, golden metal of the compass. "And it remembers that you don't belong here." The moving island was beginning to groan its final song. As Silas and Ilara raced down the white quartz path, the black volcanic rock started to crumble into the dark sea. The Sentinel had vanished back into the earth, its task complete. Behind them, Admiral Thorn was being dragged toward his own rowboats by his panicked soldiers. The conqueror of the Caribbean looked less like a legend and more like a man who had finally realized the ocean couldn't be tamed with iron and ink. "To the ship!" Silas yelled, jumping over a widening crack in the shore. They reached the Royal Swift just as the giant vines holding it began to snap. Bram reached down, his massive hand pulling Silas onto the deck. Mara and the others were already at the ropes. The island was sinking, creating a massive whirlpool of black water and green light. Silas! The compass! Ilara shouted, pointing at the golden object in his hand. The compass was vibrating so hard it felt like a living heart. Silas didn't look at the map. He looked at the needle. It spun wildly for a second, then stopped, pointing directly at the thickest part of the fog. But it wasn't just pointing. It was casting a thin, shimmering beam of golden light across the water. "Follow the light," Silas commanded, throwing his weight against the wheel. All sails up. Every inch of fabric. The Royal Swift surged forward. Behind them, the HMS Defender was caught in the turbulent wake of the sinking island, its masts shaking as it struggled to turn. Admiral Thorne was safe on his deck, but he was defeated. He could only watch as the pirate ship he had hunted across the world vanished into a path of gold. The path home. The Golden Wake. Where the compass's light touched the water, the Black Sea turned to calm, liquid gold, allowing the ship to reach incredible speeds. The parting mist. The fog didn't just clear, it dissolved into sparkling dust, revealing a world that felt newer and brighter than the one they had left. The final choice. Silas looked at the compass one last time. He realized it wasn't leading them back to Tortuga. It was leading them to a place no map had ever recorded. As they broke through the final layer of mist, the cold air of the lost sea was replaced by a warm, salty breeze. The sun was rising, painting the sky in colors Silas had never seen. Deep purples, burning oranges, and soft rose. Silas walked to the front of the ship. Thomas, the traitor, stood nearby, still guarded but looking out at the new world with tears in his eyes. Silas handed him a piece of bread. "Eat," Silas said. "We're going to need everyone's strength where we're going." Ilara joined him at the rail, the silver plate and the two map pieces now useless. They were just old paper and metal now. The true map was in Silas's hand. "Where does it point now, Captain?" she asked, a small, knowing smile on her face. Silas looked at the needle. It wasn't pointing at a port, a treasure chest, or a king's city. It was pointing toward the endless blue line where the sea met the sky. "It points to the only thing worth having, Ilara," Silas said, his voice full of a peace he hadn't felt since his father was alive. "It points to next." The Royal Swift sailed on, a black flag snapping proudly in the wind, heading toward a horizon that promised nothing but the beautiful, terrifying, and perfect unknown. The golden path did not lead back to the world Silas knew. As the Royal Swift sailed through the final curtain of shimmering dust, the sun did not just rise, it multiplied. Two suns, one a pale violet and the other a warm amber, hung in a sky that transitioned from deep indigo to a soft, glowing teal. The water beneath the hull was no longer the dark, heavy salt water of the Caribbean. It was crystal clear and felt light, as if the ship were gliding on liquid air. "Look at the depth," Mara called out from the bow. She leaned over the rail, her eyes wide. "I can see the bottom, but the bottom is miles down. There are forests of glowing coral down there, Silas. And creatures, they look like stars with fins." Silas adjusted his grip on the wheel. The golden compass was no longer spinning. It hummed a low, steady note that resonated through the wood of the ship, making the Royal Swift feel more alive than ever before. He looked at Ilara, who was busy trying to sketch the new constellations appearing in the sky. "The old maps are truly dead now," she said, her voice filled with a mix of fear and wonder. "None of the stars match. The wind doesn't follow the seasons. We are in the Etheria, the place the old legends called the cradle of the sea." Ahead of them, an island began to materialize. It did not sit on the water, it floated slightly above it, held up by massive pillars of white stone that looked like frozen waterfalls. Greenery spilled over the edges, long vines dipping into the sea to drink. The air smelled of jasmine, ozone, and something sweet that Silas couldn't name. "We need to land," Silas said. "The compass is pointing to the highest peak of that floating land. There is something there, a resonance. I can feel it in the compass." As they approached the white pillars, the crew prepared the ropes. They were nervous, moving with a quiet efficiency. They were no longer just pirates. They were explorers of a realm that shouldn't exist. Thomas, sitting on a crate near the mast, looked up at Silas. "Is there gold here, Captain?" Thomas asked, his voice hesitant. Silas looked at the glowing world around them. "There is something better than gold here, Thomas. There is a beginning. For the first time in our lives, no king owns the land we see, and no navy defines the laws we follow." The ship glided into a natural harbor carved into the white stone. As the hull touched the shimmering water near the shore, a group of figures appeared on the beach. They were tall, with skin that seemed to reflect the dual suns, and they wore robes made of woven sea silk. They didn't carry weapons. They simply watched as the Royal Swift, a battered, black-flagged intruder from a harsher world, came to rest in their paradise. Silas stepped off the gangplank onto a beach that felt like crushed pearls beneath his boots. He held the golden compass openly. He knew that in this place, secrets were useless. Ilara and Bram followed him, their hands near their weapons but their hearts open. The figures on the beach moved forward. One of them, a woman with eyes that shifted like the tides, stepped ahead of the rest. "You carry the heart of the sea," she said. Her voice didn't come from her throat. It echoed in their minds, melodic and ancient. Many cycles have passed since a child of the outer deep has found the way. "I am Lyra, the weaver of currents. I am Captain Silas Vane." Silas replied, inclining his head. "We seek the truth of the compass. It led us here, past the Sentinel and the moving island." Lyra looked at the Royal Swift. "Your vessel is tired. It carries the weight of a world built on iron and blood. Here, we build with light and memory. The compass is not just a guide, Captain Vane. It is a bridge. It was created by our ancestors who wandered into your world and found it cold. They left the compass as a way for those with seeking souls to find their way home." What Lyra revealed: the nature of Etheria. It is a pocket of the world where the original magic of the earth remains pure. The cost of the journey. To stay in Etheria, one must leave behind the desires of the outer deep. Gold, power, and revenge. The loom of fate. There is a great loom in the center of the island that regulates the currents of all the seas in the world. But we are not alone. Ilara interrupted, looking back at the horizon. "A hunter followed us. Admiral Thorn. He has the heart of a conqueror. If he finds this place, he will not see beauty. He will see a resource." Lyra's expression darkened. "The sea has a memory, and it remembers the Admiral. He has been here before, in his dreams. He is the shadow that the compass was meant to keep away. If he enters the Etheria, the balance will break." Suddenly, the amber sun flickered. A dark spot appeared on the horizon, growing larger and more jagged by the second. It wasn't a ship of wood and sail. It was a silhouette of smoke and iron. Thorn had used the residual energy of the moving island's destruction to tear a hole in the veil. The HMS Defender was gone, replaced by a monstrous vessel of shadow, fueled by the Admiral's singular obsession. "He is coming," Lyra said, her voice now a warning chime. "And he has brought the rot of your world with him." The sky above Etheria began to bruise. The teal light turned a sickly grey as the shadow ship approached. It didn't sail, it seemed to eat the distance, leaving a trail of oily black smoke on the pristine water. Silas ran back to the Royal Swift, his mind racing. He could see Thorn standing on the prow of the black ship, his uniform now tattered and stained with the soot of his new power. "Man the cannons!" Silas roared. Bram, get the silver shot. Mara, to the riggings. Silas, our cannons are for wood and iron. Ilara said, her voice trembling as she looked at the approaching nightmare. That thing is made of hate and fog. Our lead balls will pass right through it. Then we don't use lead. Silas said, looking at the golden compass. The artifact was glowing with a fierce, protective light. Lyra, how do we fight a shadow in a land of light? Lyra stood on the pearl sand, her hands raised. You must infuse your intent into your vessel. The Royal Swift has been your home, your shield, and your wings. It has a soul of its own now. If you believe in the freedom it represents, the ship will become a weapon of light. The shadow ship fired. Instead of iron balls, it launched streaks of violet fire. One hit the water near the Swift, and the beautiful coral below instantly turned to grey ash. The crew screamed as the shockwave hit the deck. Silas stood at the wheel and closed his eyes. He didn't think about the gold he hadn't found. He didn't think about the revenge he wanted against the king. He thought about the sunrise over Tortuga, the sound of the crew's laughter in the tavern, and the feeling of the wind on a clear day. He channeled every memory of freedom into the wooden wheel. The golden compass flared. A wave of brilliant amber light washed over the Royal Swift. The dark, weathered wood of the ship began to glow. The sails, once white and torn, transformed into shimmering sheets of gold thread. Fire! Silas commanded. The cannons of the Swift roared, but they didn't emit smoke. They fired beams of pure, concentrated sunlight. The first blast hit the shadow ship's bow, and the black smoke vanished where the light touched it. Thorn let out a scream that sounded like grinding metal. The battle for the soul of the sea had truly begun. The air between the two vessels screamed as beams of pure sunlight collided with the violet fire of the shadow ship. Silas stood at the wheel of the Royal Swift, his hands glowing with the same golden radiance that now permeated the ship's timber. The Swift didn't just move through the water, it danced, responding to Silas's thoughts with a grace that defied physics. Bram! Keep the starboard beams focused on their hull. Silas shouted. Mara, aim for the masts. If we can't sink a ghost, we'll clip its wings. Thorn's ship, the Obsidian Dread, was a monstrosity. It seemed to pulsate with a heartbeat of its own, its dark wood constantly shifting like smoke. Every time a beam from the Swift struck it, the shadow evaporated in a hiss of steam, only to be replaced by more darkness boiling up from within. Thorn stood on the high deck, his eyes now pits of violet flame. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was a conduit for the void. You cannot stop the inevitable. Vane! Thorn's voice boomed, echoing across the teal water like a thunderclap. The world is chaotic, messy, and lawless. I will bring the silence of the dark to every shore. The Obsidian Dread surged forward, attempting to ram the Royal Swift. Silas saw the danger and turned the wheel hard to port. Instead of a slow turn, the ship tilted on its side, the golden energy holding the crew safely to the deck as if gravity were a mere suggestion. They glided between two of the massive white pillars that supported the floating land above. Now! Silas roared. As the shadow ship followed them into the narrow passage, the Royal Swift released a massive burst of energy from its stern. The light reflected off the polished white stone of the pillars, magnifying 100 times. The passage became a tunnel of blinding brilliance. The Obsidian Dread shrieked as the light tore into its smoky hull. Huge chunks of the shadow ship fell away, dissolving into black ash before they even hit the water. He's retreating! Ilara cried out, shielding her eyes. The shadow ship veered away, trailing violet smoke and broken pieces of darkness. It headed toward the darker horizon, where the teal sky met a wall of encroaching grey. Thorn wasn't defeated, but he was wounded. His heading for the grey depths. Lyra said as she appeared on the deck of the Swift, her expression grim. He knows he cannot win here in the light. He is going to where the light cannot follow, to the heart of the void that created him. Silas looked at the compass. The needle was no longer steady. It was flickering, pointing toward the grey wall. Then we follow, Silas said, because if we don't end this here, that grey will eventually cover everything. The Royal Swift sailed toward the edge of Etheria. Behind them, the beautiful twin suns and teal waters remained. But ahead, the world was losing its color. The water turned a dull, metallic silver, and the sky became a flat, featureless grey. It was as if someone had drained the life out of the world, leaving only a sketch behind. The compass is losing its glow, Ilara noted, her voice hushed. She held the artifact, her fingers tracing the cold gold. It's as if the darkness ahead is eating the energy. The compass is a reflection of the captain's intent. Lyra explained. She stood at the bow, looking into the gloom. In the grey depths, intent is hard to maintain. It is a place of doubt, of forgotten dreams, and of the things we fear most. As they crossed the threshold, the crew began to change. Mara looked at her hands, which were now grey and translucent. Bram's strength seemed to fail him, his heavy hammer feeling like a lead weight. Even Silas felt a heavy coldness in his chest. Memories of his father's death and his years in the king's prison came back to him, sharper and more painful than ever. "Look at the water," Silas whispered. The metallic sea wasn't just water. It was like a liquid mirror. But the reflections didn't show the ship or the crew. They showed what might have been. Silas saw a reflection of himself in a navy uniform, standing next to a proud Admiral Thorne. He saw Ilara as a wealthy merchant's wife, trapped in a life of silk and boredom. He saw his crew as broken prisoners, never having escaped Tortuga. "Don't look at the reflections," Silas shouted, his voice cracking. "They aren't real. They're the void's way of making us surrender." Suddenly, a massive structure appeared in the mist. It was a mirror image of the lighthouse from Tortuga, but it was built of black glass and twisted iron. This was the mirror of the deep, the anchor of Thorne's power in this realm. Observations of the mirror of the deep. Height: approximately 200 feet, pulsing with violet energy. Atmosphere: a constant low-frequency hum that causes physical nausea. Defenses: the reflection of the Royal Swift itself, a shadow ship crewed by dark versions of themselves. "He's using our own shadows against us," Ilara said, pointing to the dark ship emerging from the base of the Black Tower. Silas looked at the compass. It was almost dark now. He realized that to win, he couldn't just rely on the magic of Etheria. He had to rely on the truth of who they were. "We are pirates," Silas roared, the sound echoing through the grey. "We are the ones who chose the hard path. We are the ones who wouldn't be broken. If the void wants our shadows, it's going to have to fight the fire that made them." To reach the Black Tower, they had to navigate through the Whispering Reef, a labyrinth of jagged, obsidian rocks that sat just below the surface of the silver water. The reef wasn't just a physical barrier. It was haunted. The rocks were covered in pale, glowing barnacles that whispered secrets into the minds of the crew. "I can't hear the wind over the voices," Bram groaned, covering his ears. "They're telling me I'm not a carpenter. They're telling me I'm just a man who breaks things." "Focus on the work, Bram," Silas commanded. "Listen to the sound of the hull. Listen to the ropes." Silas knew they needed more than just willpower to cross the reef. The compass needed a boost, a shard of the first dawn. According to Lyra, one such shard was hidden at the center of the Whispering Reef, protected by the very echoes of the first storm. "I have to go down," Silas said, looking at the dark water. "You can't dive in that." Silas. Ilara protested. The water is like liquid mercury. It will pull the air right out of your lungs. The compass will protect me, Silas said, though he wasn't entirely sure. He tied a rope around his waist and took a deep breath. As he submerged, the world of sound vanished, replaced by a visual symphony of memories. He swam through a forest of black coral that looked like frozen lightning. The whispers were louder here, 1,000 voices questioning his worthiness. Why you, Silas? You're just a thief. You're just a failure. He reached the center of the reef and found a small, pulsing white light trapped inside a cage of obsidian. As he reached for it, the reef itself seemed to wake up. The black rocks moved like teeth, trying to trap him. Silas grabbed the shard. The moment his skin touched it, a shock of pure, unadulterated joy raced through him. It was every sunrise, every laugh, and every moment of freedom he had ever felt. The obsidian cage shattered. He kicked toward the surface, the white light in his hand cutting through the silver water like a blade. When he broke the surface and climbed back onto the Royal Swift, he slammed the shard into the center of the golden compass. The effect was instantaneous. A shockwave of white light exploded from the ship, silencing the whispers of the reef and turning the obsidian rocks back into harmless gray stone. The compass wasn't just glowing now. It was a miniature sun, and the path to Thorn's Black Tower was finally wide open. The shadow is afraid of the truth, Silas said, wiping the silver water from his face. Let's go show the Admiral ours. The black glass of the mirror tower loomed over the Royal Swift like a jagged obsidian tooth. As Silas steered the glowing ship forward, the silver water of the gray depths began to churn. Out of the metallic depths rose the shadow ship, the Void Swift. It was an exact, dark reflection of their vessel, but its sails were made of tattered night and its hull was composed of solidified smoke. Look at the deck, Mara shouted, her voice trembling. It's us. Standing on the deck of the Void Swift were figures that mirrored the crew. A Shadow Silas stood at the wheel, his eyes glowing with the same violet flame as Admiral Thorn's. A Shadow Ilara held a broken, blackened compass, and a Shadow Bram gripped a hammer made of frozen grief. The sight was enough to freeze the blood of the bravest sailor. They aren't us, Silas roared, the golden compass in his hand pulsing with the white light of the shard. They are the doubts we left behind. Bram, Mara, don't look at their faces. Look at your own light. The two ships collided with a sound like a scream. There was no wood splintering. Instead, light and shadow ground against each other, creating sparks of violet and gold that hissed into the silver sea. The shadow crew began to board the Royal Swift, moving like ink spilling across the deck. The battle of the reflections. The weight of doubt. When a shadow sailor touched a crew member, it whispered their failures into their minds. The light's defense. Silas realized the shard's light was a weapon. Channel the light through your blades, he commanded. The ship's will. The Royal Swift itself fought back, its golden planks burning the feet of the shadow intruders. Silas faced his own reflection. The Shadow Silas didn't speak with words, but with a crushing sense of loneliness. It showed him a future where he found the compass, but everyone he loved was gone, a king of a dead world. You think I fear being alone? Silas growled, parrying a blow from a sword made of shadow glass. I was alone in the king's cell for years. I found my family on this deck, and they aren't going anywhere. He thrust the golden compass forward. The white light of the first dawn exploded from the artifact, striking the Shadow Silas in the chest. The reflection didn't bleed, it evaporated, its violet eyes fading into nothingness. Across the deck, the other Shadow crew members began to dissolve as the pirates found their courage. With a final, desperate surge, Silas steered the Royal Swift directly into the base of the mirror tower. The golden hull acted as a ram, shattering the black glass entrance in a rain of obsidian shards. They were inside. The interior of the mirror tower was a labyrinth of infinite reflections. The walls, the floor, and the ceiling were all made of the same dark, polished glass. Silas and Ilara stepped off the ship, leaving Bram and Mara to guard the entrance against the encroaching grey mist. The air inside was cold, not the cold of ice, but the cold of a world without hope. "The compass is pointing up," Ilara said, her voice sounding small in the vast, echoing space. She held the silver plate, which was now vibrating in rhythm with the tower's dark hum. "But there are no stairs. Only reflections." As they walked, the mirrors began to play tricks. One reflection showed Silas back in Tortuga, drinking away his life, never having left the tavern. Another showed Ilara as a prisoner of Admiral Thorn, forced to chart the Navy's path to conquest. "Ignore them, Ilara," Silas warned, keeping his eyes fixed on the golden compass. "Thorn wants us to get lost in what if. We have to stay in what is." Suddenly, the floor beneath them vanished. They weren't falling, but floating in a void of stars and glass. A figure appeared before them, walking as if on solid ground. It was Admiral Thorn, but he was no longer human. His skin was the color of a bruised sky, and his hair flowed like black smoke. In his hand, he held a scepter topped with a cracked, violet gem, the heart of the void. "You have come a long way to die, Captain Vane," Thorn said, his voice echoing from every mirror at once. "You think you represent freedom. Freedom is a lie told by the weak to justify their chaos. I offer the world something better. Certainty. A world where every choice is mapped, and every soul has its place. A world where no one dreams." Ilara countered, her eyes flashing. "You don't want order, Thorn. You want a tomb." Thorn laughed, a sound like glass breaking. He raised his scepter, and the reflections around them came to life. They weren't just shadows anymore. They were physical barriers, closing in like the walls of a trap. Silas felt the weight of the tower's magic pressing down on him, trying to snuff out the light of the compass. He realized that the tower wasn't just a building. It was a machine designed to rewrite reality itself. Thorn didn't attack with his sword. He attacked with the truth. Or rather, his version of it. The violet gem in his scepter began to pulse, and the images in the mirrors changed once again. Silas saw his father, not as a hero, but as a man who had been broken by the search for the compass. "Your father didn't die for a dream, Silas," Thorn whispered, appearing right behind him. "He died because he realized the compass was a curse. It shows you what you want, but it never tells you the price. The price for your freedom today is the lives of everyone on your ship. Look at them." In a large mirror to the left, Silas saw the Royal Swift. The golden light was fading. Bram and Mara were being overwhelmed by a new wave of shadow creatures. The ship was sinking into the metallic silver sea. "Surrender the compass to me," Thorn offered, his hand outstretched. "I can save them. I can rewrite the moment you left the harbor. I can give you a life where your father is alive and you are a respected man of the sea. All it costs is your choice." Silas felt the golden compass grow heavy. The temptation was a physical weight. To have his father back, to save his crew, to end the constant running. It was everything he had ever wanted. He looked at Ilara. She was frozen, her reflection showing her own parents, long lost to the sea. "Ilara, don't listen," Silas yelled. "He's right, Silas," Ilara whispered, her eyes glazed. "We're just pirates. We're just making a mess of the world. Maybe the world needs a map." Thorn smiled, a jagged, terrifying expression. He reached for the compass. But as his fingers brushed the gold, the artifact let out a high-pitched, piercing whistle. The sound snapped Silas back to reality. He looked at the compass and saw a reflection he hadn't noticed before. It wasn't a reflection of his past or a fake future. It was a reflection of the now, of the sweat on his brow, the dirt under his fingernails, and the fire in his heart. "You're wrong, Thorn," Silas said, pulling the compass back. "Freedom isn't about the destination. It's about the right to be wrong. It's about the right to make a mess and find a way to fix it." He didn't use the light to attack Thorn. Instead, he slammed the golden compass into the floor of the mirror tower. "If this tower is built on certainty," Silas roared, "then let's see how it handles a captain who doesn't know where he's going." The glass floor began to crack, not in a straight line, but in a chaotic, spiderweb pattern that defied Thorn's control. The certainty of the tower was breaking, and the real battle was finally about to begin. The sound was not a snap, but a roar, the sound of 1,000 years of logic being torn apart. As the golden compass struck the glass floor, a web of white-hot fractures raced outward from the impact site. The mirror tower groaned, a deep, metallic sound that felt like a scream in the bones of the earth. Admiral Thorn recoiled, his violet skin flickering like a dying candle. "What have you done?" he shrieked, his voice losing its godlike resonance. "This tower is the architecture of the future. You are destroying the very foundation of the world." "I'm destroying your world, Thorn," Silas shouted, struggling to stay on his feet as the floor began to tilt and dissolve. The reflections in the surrounding mirrors began to glitch. One moment, the room was a dark temple. The next, it was a swirling vortex of stars. The next, it was the deck of the Royal Swift in a storm. Gravity became an afterthought. Silas felt himself floating, then slammed back down as a new reality flickered into existence. The chaos of the shatter, the temporal drift. Silas saw his past self meeting Elara for the first time. But she was a ghost. The physical flux. The sword in Silas's hand turned to wood, then to gold, then back to iron. The navigator's skill. Elara grabbed Silas's hand. "Don't look at the walls, Silas. Look at the compass. It's the only thing that isn't changing." Elara was right. While the room around them was a chaotic kaleidoscope, the golden compass in Silas's hand remained solid, heavy, and bright. It was the anchor. Thorn, however, was coming apart. Without his certainty, his shadow form couldn't hold its shape. He lunged at Silas, his hand transforming into a jagged blade of violet obsidian. Silas parried the blow, but the force of it sent him flying through a mirror that showed a burning tortuga. He landed on a patch of grass that didn't exist, then rolled back into the glass chamber. He realized that Thorn was drawing power from the heart of the void, the gem atop his scepter, to try and stitch the tower back together. "The scepter!" Silas yelled to Elara. "We have to break the gem." But Thorn was faster. He raised the scepter, and a wave of violet energy blasted through the room, freezing the shifting reflections into a jagged, frozen landscape of shards. He was forcing the chaos into a new, even more terrifying order. "If I cannot have a world of peace," Thorn growled, "I will have a world of statues. Permanent, silent, and mine." The air in the tower became thick, like cold honey. Every movement felt like pushing through a wall. Thorn was calcifying the reality around them, turning the very air into black glass. Silas could feel his own boots becoming part of the floor. "Silas, I can't move my legs," Elara cried out. The grey frost of the void was climbing up her boots, turning her skin to the same dull silver as the metallic sea outside. Silas looked at the compass. The needle was spinning at a dizzying speed. It wasn't pointing at a location anymore. It was vibrating in resonance with the heart of the void. He understood then, the compass and the heart were two halves of the same ancient power, one meant to find, the other meant to keep. "Give me the shard." Silas told the compass, though he spoke to the memory of his father. He reached into the center of the compass and pulled out the shard of the first dawn. It burned with a heat that melted the glass frost around his feet. With a roar of effort, Silas threw the shard toward Ilara. "Ilara, use the silver plate. Reflect the light at the scepter." Ilara caught the shard, its light instantly shattering the glass holding her. She didn't hesitate. She held the silver plate from the mountain temple aloft, placing the glowing shard in front of it. The optical strike. Focus. The silver plate acted as a parabolic mirror. Amplification. The shard's light was magnified 100-fold by the ancient silver. The beam. A pillar of pure, white brilliance shot across the room, striking Thorn's violet gem. The collision of light and shadow created a sun in the center of the tower. The sound was deafening, the high-pitched whistle of the compass meeting the low-frequency thrum of the void. Thorn screamed as the light tore through his shadow flesh. The scepter cracked, the violet gem inside beginning to leak dark smoke. You are a thief of the light," Thorn hissed, his eyes wide with a final, desperate madness. He didn't surrender. Instead, he grabbed the cracked gem and shoved it into his own chest. The tower shook with a force that knocked Silas and Ilara toward the edge of the void. Thorn wasn't just using the power now. He was becoming the void itself. He was becoming a black hole at the center of the world. And he was taking everything with him. The mirror tower began to collapse inward. The black glass walls were being sucked into the dark sun that was once Admiral Thorn. Outside, the Royal Swift was being pulled toward the tower by a massive gravitational tide. Silas saw Bram and Mara clinging to the masts, their faces filled with terror. "It's over. Vane." Thorn's voice was now a chorus of 1,000 lost souls. "If I cannot rule this world, I will consume it. We will all be silent together." Silas stood at the edge of the collapsing reality. He looked at the golden compass. It was the only light left in a world of growing shadow. He knew what he had to do, but the thought made his heart ache. The compass had been his father's dream, his own ticket to freedom, and the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Silas, no," Ilara said, seeing the look in his eyes. She knew him too well. "There has to be another way." "Here's a vacuum, Ilara," Silas said, his voice calm despite the roaring wind of the collapse. "The only way to stop a void is to fill it with something it can't handle. Something that isn't certain. Something that is pure choice." Silas stepped forward, walking into the heart of the violet gale. Thorn lashed out with tentacles of shadow, but Silas ignored them, the golden aura of the compass protecting him for one final moment. He reached the center of the storm, where Thorn's twisted, violet face stared out from the darkness. "Here is your certainty, Thorn," Silas yelled. He didn't stab the Admiral. He reached out and pressed the golden compass directly into the Admiral's chest, right onto the glowing, cracked heart of the void. The reaction was instantaneous. The compass didn't break. It opened. It released all the intent it had stored for centuries, the hopes of 1,000 sailors, the dreams of his father, and Silas's own unshakable desire for the unknown. It was an infinite amount of information, of possibility, being poured into a vessel that only knew how to be one thing. Thorn couldn't contain it. The violet energy turned to white, then gold, then a spectrum of colors that had no name. The Admiral's form shattered into 1,000,000 sparks of light. The mirror tower exploded, not outward, but into a cloud of sparkling dust that drifted harmlessly into the silver sea. As the darkness vanished, Silas felt himself falling. He saw the Royal Swift. He saw Ilara reaching out for him. And then, for the first time in his life, everything went perfectly, beautifully white. Silas felt the world return to him in pieces. First, the smell, not the antiseptic scent of ozone or the rot of the void, but the honest, stinging salt of the sea and the sweet aroma of cedar wood. Then, the sound, the rhythmic slap of water against a hull and the distant, melodic cry of a gull. He opened his eyes. The sky above was no longer teal or grey. It was a deep, impossible azure, streaked with clouds that looked like spun silk. He was lying on the deck of the Royal Swift. "He's awake." Mara's voice rang out, sharp with relief. A moment later, Ilara's face appeared in his field of vision. Her hair was a mess, and her cheek was smudged with soot, but her eyes were bright. She reached down, her hand warm and solid as she helped him sit up. Silas groaned, his muscles aching as if he'd spent a month hauling anchors. "The tower," Silas managed to rasp. "Gone," Ilara said, gesturing to the horizon. When the compass opened, it didn't just break the tower. It washed the grey depths away. "Look." Silas stood unsteadily and walked to the rail. The metallic silver sea had vanished. In its place was a vibrant, living ocean. But it wasn't the Caribbean he knew. The water sparkled with a faint bioluminescence even in the daylight, and the horizon seemed to stretch infinitely farther than it should. The mirror tower was nothing but a memory, replaced by a calm, golden mist that clung to the surface of the water. "And the compass?" Silas asked, looking at his empty hands. He felt a pang of grief. It had been his father's only legacy. "It's not gone, Silas," Bram said, walking over with a heavy tread. He pointed toward the binnacle, the wooden stand that housed the ship's steering compass. The old, iron compass of the Royal Swift was gone. In its place, fused into the very wood of the ship, was a glowing gold dial. It had no needle. Instead, the entire face of the compass shifted and changed, showing maps of islands that didn't exist and currents that flowed in patterns of light. "It didn't break," Ilara whispered. "It chose a bigger home. The Royal Swift isn't just a ship anymore. It's the compass." Silas placed his hand on the glowing wood. He felt a hum of energy travel up his arm, settling in his chest. The ship felt aware. It felt ready. But as he looked around the deck, he saw the cost. The sails were charred, the wood was scarred by shadow, fire, and his crew looked like they had been through a war. They were safe, but they were changed. They were no longer the desperate pirates who had gathered in a Tortuga tavern. They were the guardians of a secret world. As the golden mist began to thin, a familiar shape appeared on the water. It was the HMS Defender. The giant navy ship was battered, its masts broken and its white sails hanging like funeral shrouds. It sat low in the water, drifting aimlessly. "Should we finish it, Captain?" Mara asked, her hand on the trigger of a cannon. "After everything Thorn did." "Wait," Silas said, watching the ship through his spyglass. He didn't see shadow soldiers or violet flames. He saw men. Real men, in torn blue coats, leaning over the rails and coughing up the last of the grey fog. They looked lost, terrified, and profoundly human. Without Thorn's dark will to drive them, they were just sailors caught in a nightmare they didn't understand. "Lower a boat," Silas commanded. "Bram, Ilara, come with me." They rowed across the shimmering water toward the massive ship. As they climbed the rope ladder, they were met not by muskets, but by silence. On the deck, the young officer who had once stood nervously beside Thorn was sitting against a mast, his head in his hands. He looked up as Silas stepped onto the deck. "He's gone, isn't he?" the officer asked. His voice was hollow. "Thorn is gone," Silas confirmed. "The void he invited in consumed him. You're free." The officer looked around at his broken ship and his traumatized men. "Free? We're in a world that isn't on our charts. We have no food, half our water is fouled, and we don't even know which way is north." Silas looked at the Royal Swift anchored nearby, its golden glow a beacon of hope. He thought about the pirate code, about the harsh justice of the sea, but he also thought about Lyra and the Weaver of Currents. "We'll give you supplies," Silas said, shocking both the Navy men and his own crew. "And we'll give you a heading. The world you came from is still back there, through the veil. But you have to promise one thing." "Anything," the officer said desperately. "Tell them the truth." Silas said, his voice hard. "Tell them the golden compass isn't a weapon for kings. Tell them the lost sea is a place for those who seek, not those who conquer. If the king sends another fleet like thorns, the sea won't be so merciful next time." As they rowed back to the Swift, Ilara looked at him. "You think they'll listen?" "Some will," Silas said. "And for the others, well, they'll have to find us first. And this ship doesn't like being found by people with closed hearts." That night, the Royal Swift felt like a temple. The golden glow from the new compass dial provided a soft, warm light that made the scarred wood of the deck look like polished amber. Silas sat alone in the captain's cabin, the room where he had found the hidden drawer and his father's map. He was staring at the desk when he noticed something he had missed in all the chaos. The explosion of the mirror tower had sent a pulse of energy through everything, and it had reacted strangely with the dark oak of the desk. The wood grain seemed to have shifted, forming tiny, intricate symbols that looked like the carvings from the Etherian temple. Silas ran his fingers over the symbols. As he touched them, a voice didn't speak in his head, but a feeling flooded his mind. It was a memory that wasn't his. "Silas, if you are reading this, then you have done what I could not. You didn't just find the compass, you understood it." It was his father. Not a ghost, but a residual echo left in the things he had touched. The compass was never a map to gold, my son. It was a map to ourselves. I spent my life looking for a door, never realizing I was the key. You have broken the cycle. You have shown that a man can be a pirate and a hero, a thief and a guardian. The world beyond the veil is yours now. Don't look back at the shores of the old world. There are oceans of light waiting for a captain who isn't afraid to lead. The symbols faded back into the dark oak grain, leaving Silas in the quiet dark. He felt a tear track down his cheek, but he wasn't sad. The weight he had carried, the need to prove himself to a dead man, the need to justify his life, was gone. He walked out onto the deck. The crew was gathered near the bow, watching the bioluminescent fish jump in the wake of the ship. The two suns of Etheria were gone, replaced by a single, massive moon that turned the ocean into a field of diamonds. "Where to, Captain?" Bram asked, his voice full of a new kind of loyalty. Silas looked at the golden compass dial. It was showing a path toward a chain of islands that looked like stars fallen into the sea. "We have a world to explore, Bram," Silas said, a wide, true smile breaking across his face. "And I think it's time we showed this crew what the Royal Swift can really do. Set the sails for the Star Isles. We're going to see what's on the other side of forever." The Royal Swift didn't just sail into the Star Isles. It felt as if the ship were being pulled upward by the very gravity of the heavens. As they crested the final wave of the Golden Wake, the horizon opened into a sight that made even the grizzled Bram drop his hammer in awe. Before them lay an archipelago where the islands did not sit upon the water, but hovered at varying heights, connected by shimmering bridges of liquid starlight. "It's beautiful," Ilara whispered, her fingers frantically working a quill to capture the impossible geometry. "The physics here, the gravity constant must be entirely different. Look at how the water flows upward from the lower basins to the higher peaks." The islands were lush with flora that defied the primary colors of the old world. Trees with leaves of translucent silver swayed in a breeze that tasted of mint and distant thunder. Giant, winged creatures, part bird, part ray, glided between the floating landmasses, their songs echoing with a crystalline resonance. Features of the Star Isles. The bridges of Lamina. Translucent pathways made of solidified light that allowed the crew to walk between islands. The gravity pools. Areas of the sea where the water rose in pillars, allowing the Royal Swift to elevate to higher harbors. The echo flowers. Plants that recorded the sounds of the wind, replaying the music of the spheres to anyone who listened. Silas steered the ship toward the largest island, which sat at the center of the cluster. At its peak stood a structure that mirrored the design of the Golden Compass, a rotating series of rings made of white marble and gold. This was the Celestial Forge, the place where the original architects had breathed life into the artifacts of the sea. "We aren't just visitors here, are we?" Mara asked, looking at Silas. Her tough pirate exterior had softened, replaced by a look of profound peace. "No," Silas said, feeling the golden compass in the binnacle pulse in rhythm with the forge. "We are the first of a new kind of people. We're the bridge between the world that was and the world that could be." As they docked in a harbor made of smooth, warm glass, Lyra appeared once more. She looked at Silas with a gaze that seemed to see through time itself. "The choice you made in the tower has echoed. Captain, you gave the sea its freedom back. In return, the Star Isles offer you a home. But remember, the greatest treasure is not the land you stand on, but the crew you keep." Silas looked back at his crew, the thieves, the runaways, the carpenters, and the scholars. They had become something more than a crew. They were a legend in the making. 6 months had passed since the Royal Swift vanished from the charts of the King's Navy. In the Old World, the story of Silas Vane had become a ghost story told in the taverns of Tortuga, a tale of a pirate who took on an admiral and sailed off the edge of the world. But here, in the realm they named Vane's Reach, life was vibrant and real. The crew had built a settlement among the silver trees. It wasn't a fortress or a prison. It was a harbor of open doors. Ilara had founded an academy of navigation, teaching the children of the crew how to read the stars that moved and the water that sang. Bram had used the local ironwood to build structures that would last 1,000 years, his hammers now creating homes instead of war machines. Silas stood on the balcony of his home, looking out over the Star Isles. In his hand, he held a small glass bottle. Inside was a piece of parchment, the final map he would ever draw. To those who feel the pull of the horizon, the world is wider than the walls they build for you. The golden compass is not a thing of metal, but a thing of heart. Seek the light, trust your crew, and never be afraid of the fog. We are waiting for you at the end of the map. Captain Silas Vane. He tossed the bottle into a gravity pool, watching as it was caught in a current that would carry it back through the veil, back to the salty, grey docks of the Caribbean. It was a seed of hope planted in a tired world. "The wind is picking up, Silas," Ilara said, stepping out beside him. She looked toward the Royal Swift, which sat in the harbor, its golden hull reflecting the twin suns. The ship was always ready, always calling. The compass is showing a new path, somewhere beyond the Star Isles, a place where the sky meets the deep. Silas smiled, the same rakish, witty spark in his eyes that had first drawn her to him in that dark tavern so long ago. He adjusted his coat and felt the steady, warm hum of the golden energy in his veins. He didn't need a map anymore. He was the map. "Well then," Silas said, extending his hand to her. "It would be a shame to keep the horizon waiting, wouldn't it?" They walked down to the docks together. The crew was already there, the black flag with the golden needle snapping in the breeze. As Silas took the wheel, he didn't look back at the islands they had built or the world they had left. He looked forward, into the infinite, beautiful blue. "Set the sails," Silas roared, his voice carrying across the liquid starlight. "Full speed ahead. We're going to see what's on the other side of next." The Royal Swift jumped forward, a streak of gold against the teal sky, vanishing into the eternal dawn of a world without end.